Welcome to DeFi Expectations, the show that challenges what crypto and decentralized finance really mean in the face of global and fiat collapse. Today, we have a very interesting show, and I'm excited to bring on a couple speakers who will be talking on various matters. We may even have other people joining later. I'm Paul Thomas, also known as Fry. I'll be your host for this evening, basically guiding us through some different topics related to what's basically happening in the greater global landscape, how it impacts crypto, and things that we can do to actually survive this kind of reality that's coming. So we're recording this in what I view is the final innings of the fiat system, not as alarmists, but as builders, as sovereigns, as individuals who are just working in this space through our love of cryptocurrency and decentralized finance to try to be prepared for and to escape what comes next, or to thrive, not just survive. In this episode, we're going to explore what happens after the trust is gone, when treasuries become toxic, which I think we're already in agreement with has started to happen, has already been happening since their foundation. When leveraged ghost funds that hold up an entire economy disappear into thin air, and when your freedom is just one quantum exploit or AI bot away from complete annihilation. So we'll track the cracks. We'll talk about everything from Japan's temple economy to Malay's messy tango with the IMF and some of the hypocrisies there, to the crypto fire escape that Wall Street has just unlocked. A whole new era is approaching, and if you're listening, you're already living in it. So we'll go ahead and talk debt, collapse, strategy, and sovereignty, because everything will fry, and that's why we buy. So thank you guys for coming on, and I'll go ahead and let everyone introduce themselves.
Hedy, you want to go first?
Yeah, I can go first. Hedy's what I go by on most socials. Obviously, Brendan Hatfield. Super keen to be here. And to learn more today. I think that's it. And to hear where we're heading and what the salvation is going to be, perhaps.
Yeah, well, I'm Nick, of course, producer from Bitcoin Live. And I'm looking forward to this discussion. I think Johnny and Steve will also join at some point. They're always a little bit busy. But I think it will be a fun, well, maybe not fun, but interesting conversation.
Yes, busy. They're just running late. Let's call it what it is. But I'm looking forward to them joining. No, I'm sure that they've got a lot going on. I'm excited to hear from them as well on this topic. But yeah, I think we all have a pretty good group here, and I think that we can learn a lot from each other. We're definitely, from the discussions I've heard, the discussions I've had with you, Nick, and I've kind of seen some of your stuff as well, Hattie. I can tell that we're pretty aligned on a lot of things, but I think we also may learn some things from each other today. So I'm excited to kick off this topic. So I'll start with the first subject that we wanted to cover today, which is the U.S. Treasury crisis rolling into ruin. Rolling debt, what it means, and why it's accelerating. So one of the biggest issues that I've always been just very entrenched in, especially when it comes to my hatred of government and especially fiat systems, I don't shy away from it. People learn very quickly once they know me that I'm not government's best friend. And when I talk about it, to me, it's something that's measurable. It's something that I can literally be like, you want to understand why I'm not a fan of government and centralized banking institutions? Look at this chart. Look at this. Look at this giant slope that just goes like this. And it's our debt crisis. It's literally the fact that we're being governed by a bunch of people who regulate our industries and can't manage a checkbook. And we haven't even had a balanced budget since Bill Clinton. Not to say he was perfect or any of our presidents were either. But there's definitely something to be said of that. But the issue that we are talking about today is more specific to rolling debt and what that means. So the U.S. government is now rolling over more than $550 billion in debt every single week, up from just $100 billion in 2013. That is a 450% increase. But what does it mean to roll debt? Because again, I talk about this slope that's just shooting up and how unsustainable it is, right? But now we're talking about rolling debt, which is basically like refinancing your credit card every 30 days, which is also ironic, right? Because these people, like, aren't these people tied into our credit ratings and systems? Like, how is it that we can't pay our debts, right? But we're telling other people what their credit rating is? It's pretty ridiculous. So imagine you're refinancing your credit card every 30 days, hoping interest rates don't spike or liquidity doesn't dry up. This short-term addiction makes the entire system vulnerable to even minor shocks. That includes war, inflation, or an AI-driven trading flash crash. I mean, we're basically approaching a scenario where it's like a house of cards that could be knocked over so easily by just the slightest touch. We're not paying down the debt. We're just rolling it faster and faster towards the end. And the question then at this point is, how long can you refinance a Bonzi? I mean, what are your thoughts on this, you guys?
Well, I think, when you look at Thanksgiving Friday, when the CME froze, the Chicago CME froze for like 10, 11 hours, and you also had like a very high spike in silver. I think those are all clear signs that things are terribly wrong. And for example, the shorts on silver are also financed with the Japanese carry trade, right? So, and the Japanese, I mean, you probably also noticed the stimulus package from Japan, right? It's $135 billion worth of stimulus, and half of it will go to support people to finance their energy bills and give them blank checks to do something with it. I mean, these amounts are insane. That's like if you translate it into to US terms, it would be like a $1 trillion stimulus package in equal terms, right? So you can't keep this up very long, but it will probably. I always say like because I'm a little bit a doomer in that sense, right? I think we're all, but that's because you're in it, and when you're sort of in it, you think it will happen immediately, right? Because you're seeing all the numbers and you're seeing it's unsustainable. I always tell myself it takes longer than I think, but it takes shorter than the general public thinks. So it's probably somewhere in the middle. So it will probably take longer than we think. I mean, when you look at Zimbabwe,
we think, yes, I hear you there.
yeah. So I think in that sense, if you are in risk assets, it's actually a good time, strangely speaking, because when you look at Zimbabwe and the stock market during those times, it has to go up, right? Like in Weimar Republic, they had to juice the stock markets because otherwise, pension funds go bust and the whole system goes down. So they have to juice the stock markets to keep the system afloat. And the only way to do that is to sacrifice the currency, as you see in Japan. And they can keep that up longer because they, shut out all the exits, right? So they're trying to close all the exits so the capital can't fly. So but it's crazy, and it can't last forever.
Agreed 100%. And I love what you said about it'll probably be longer than we think, like you and I, Nick, and some of us who kind of have this mentality about it. But at the same time, it'll be shorter than other people who are ignoring it think, and it seems like it's strange to me because I think what made it so apparent is there was a period of time, following DeFi summer. And I mean, I've had a lot of experiences with that I could go into on a whole nother topic. But there was a period of time when it was just like printing money, like just the opportunities that were coming through, just windfalls of cash here and there. It felt like it was going to last forever, right? And in the midst of all this, you had the Biden economy. And, don't get me wrong, there are mistakes before, during, and after that as well. But we see this. Yeah, we see this influx of inflation, and it was just, to be honest, like I wasn't really buying the groceries at the time. My soon-to-be ex-wife was buying the groceries. She would tell me every once in a while, milk costs this much, eggs cost this much. Honey, our grocery bill was $200. Our grocery bill was $300, $400. And it didn't mean anything to me. Money didn't mean anything to me anymore because we're going to be rich, man, right? Like, who cares? Like, let everything fall apart. But it was like when I when things started to change and opportunities became a little bit more scattered and further apart, and of course I had my separation and things, and I'm starting to like take on a lot of the responsibilities that my partner was taking on before. And suddenly I'm like, my God, this is insane that I'm going to the grocery store and I'm spending this much money. And, I explain it this way because I feel like that was a blessing to me, right? Because it just happened all at once. It was like you're oblivious to it and then you're very aware of it, right? But I think what most people are dealing with, it's like, I've heard this analogy again and again, but it's like you're in a pot of boiling water and the heat's turning up slowly, right? You're not just immediately thrown into boiling water. And I think people are becoming used to it. It's things like I talked to someone the other day, and I don't talk to people who are very aware of this issue very much. I'm always having to convince them that we are approaching a surveillance state worldwide. We're surveillance state. But this woman surprised me, and she said, "Well, we already have that. Yeah. It's already there." And I'm like, "Yeah, it is." But like normally, I'm trying to convince people that we're getting there because if you asked 30 years ago if we'd have a Patriot Act, if you'd asked 30 years ago if pretty much all our members of Congress would be funded by a foreign entity like APAC, you know what I mean? If you asked 30 years ago if we would even have a bill that would enter Congress that we're going to put restrictions on freedom of speech such that we can't criticize a certain country, these, not America, but like another country, right? Like you'd never believe it. But now that we're sitting in it, we have to convince people that it's already here and it's going to get worse.
Yeah, especially the latter part, right? I think people don't realize how much worse it can get. And that's, I think, the boiling frog part, because Snowden, of course, revealed like the NSA is already, listening to all our conversations, and I forgot the law in Europe that they can sort of read all our messages. I think it's not true yet, or it's almost true, but it's going to go through anyway. And these things, and then people say, yeah, but Snowden already told us that, and everything is fine. Look where we are now. Governments are still behaving more or less, and if you don't do anything wrong, what's there to worry about? And they're doing it for our own protection. Blah blah blah.
Makes you wonder what's the standard on behaving if our governments are behaving, right?
Well, yeah, I think that's the question, right? Because once you sort of, if you know crypto, and that's the other thing, because we're in crypto and we're following all these technological developments, which are on an exponential curve and reinforcing each other. And if you sort of realize that we're going to a future, in a very near future, like probably within 5 to 10 years, 10 years max, but I think even within 5 years is perhaps too far out, that many people will lose their jobs, right? Like many people, like way more people than people realize. And not low income only, it's also high income. Like it will probably just be highly educated blue collar people who, still have a chance. And then maybe people who are taking care of other people or in teaching, so those kind of areas. But that means that you got a large swath of people who have to do something else, and those people will have to behave very well, listen very well to what the government wants them to do, because otherwise you're cut off and you don't have a job, you can't protest, you can't lay down your job. And these governments, history teaches us that as we reach the end of this fiat cycle, which has happened every 100 to 200 years, governments become very dictatorial. That's what they do. They're surviving. They're like an entity or an organism, and it's trying to survive, and it will do anything it has to do in order to do that. And if you're a liability, then you'll be taken care of.
Yeah, that's 100% accurate. And I think the scary thing is when and this is another reason, we were talking about this before the call, it's a reason that I got off Facebook recently. One, it's this idea of a friend. What does it even mean on there when you're connected to a lot of people you don't talk to, don't care if you're alive or dead? But it's also like the political confusion that has led up to this. And we're talking about the debt crisis, right? And we're talking about rolling debt, and we're talking about financial instability that's being put about by our government systems, right? And you would think that after this much failure, right, that we would literally not trust either side, in America, at least in terms of left or right, because both of them have proven to be very inefficient with management of money. But it seems like, and a lot of my friends are very much on the left. I come from like the rave scene, so I have tons of friends that are still on that side. And, when it comes to like, people's rights and things like that, I just feel like, one, government should be out of it. And two, like I've always respected people regardless of differences, you know what I mean? But it's not a reason for me to vote for the left, but they continue to believe that it's just Orange Man. It's just, we just got to get rid of this guy, and then the Democrats are going to take the House and it's going to get better. And I'm like, what has not become apparent to you right now? I mean, we're actually having some people wake up and realize a very interesting truth that has been lost to people for some time. But it's the fact that it's not just the right that can be authoritarian. In fact, it's really the left that are the purest authoritarians, the people who want to control speech, who want to have the government regulate every part of our existence, the kind of trading that we can do, how we are taxed, how our funds are used. And the only way to really get around the idea of this authoritarianism being bad is your belief that someone else can be better with your rights than you can, which to me is a very tall task. But if we are locked into this belief that the only reason we're losing right now is because our football team didn't win, which is basically what politics has become. Let's be honest. Nobody even understands economy. No one understands economics. No one understands even what their side's supposed to support anymore. How can we think we're going to crawl out of this issue when the debt crisis isn't going to be solved by the left in America? The debt crisis isn't going to be solved by the right. So if we just continue to raise the debt ceiling, if we just continue to act like this is a left versus right problem and it's not an entirely government-owned problem, and that these people on both sides continue to take our rights away iteratively every year, I do not see how we can possibly solve this issue. But maybe somebody has a more optimistic belief in this than me.
I think you're right. I think it's basically like Edward Griffin. I think he made the point that it's collectivism versus individualism, and I think that's the real dichotomy. You have to forget like the left-right dichotomy, which is mostly sort of just, for the most part, fake or irrelevant. They're just two wings of the same animal. And even when you look at fascism in Germany, like it was called National Socialism because it had certain characteristics of socialism, right? They even had like a money that was sort of backed by labor and gold from the Bank of International Settlements, which was financing Hitler at the time. So the point is, they're both horrible, but we're moving in either direction. Either it will be, classic socialism, like in Cambodia, or in China, or in Russia, or wherever, or it will be National Socialism of the other kind that we know, or a new hybrid authoritarianism, right? I mean, you can think of a lot of different combinations, but they're not the solution, not the real solution. So, but problem is people are dependent, and they're becoming more and more dependent, and and that's the dependency is sort of the issue, right? And people think they can't take care of themselves, they can't take care of their own community, they can't take action. They think everything they do doesn't matter in the bigger scheme of things. They think they need more intervention instead of less intervention, right? So they've been taught all the wrong things, and like you said, they have no clue about economy. And if you tell them, like what we just opened the show with, the situation with the debt rolling over and refinancing of the debt, or the situation in Japan, people have no idea. They have absolutely no idea until it hits, and then they take the official narrative that the mainstream tells them, and then it's already too late because it's often after the fact. So, yeah, what do you think, Eddie?
I've got a lot. I think what I want to start with is the biggest issue we have, and this is globally, is we say it's the government's fault. We outsource because we pay tax the problem to the government to solve for us. And what we don't realize is we always go, the government is printing money or the government is doing X, but people forget that it's our money that they're taking away from us, whether it be through tax or whether it be through inflation, it's our money. And once we understand that and we take ownership, which we can start talking on the escape hatches and Bitcoin and how self-sovereignty is the important thing, we need to come back to self-sovereignty. We need to say, this is my economic output that I'm giving a portion to government to. The word there is my economic output.
Yeah.
And once we start understanding that aspect of it, everything falls into place, and it makes it, you then realize it's your responsibility. So each taxpayer's responsibility to ensure that we don't land up in the situation we're in, because every government has done that.
So maybe
Yeah.
would you also agree that the words "our" and "we" are misleading, because you should, like you said, people should actually realize it's I am the government, or the government represents me. It's my money that is, But if you say "we" or "our," then it sort of becomes an amorphous blob.
Individualism versus collectivism, right?
Well, this is where I was going to with education, is that we keep having the education dictates to us what our reality is.
Yeah.
And we come out of school believing a reality, believing a narrative, for lack of a better word, which then the we, like you just said, we believe the we is something completely different to what the we is, or what economic output actually is, and how currencies are actually pinned or pegged, and how the system works. And I think we're not taught history, so we don't realize that history doesn't always repeat itself, but it rhymes. So Nick has alluded to Zimbabwe, and this is where the crux of the problem in the first world is, because I wasn't born in the first world. The problem with the first world is, as I see it, is you don't realize it until the pain hits.
Yeah.
So when the cracks start appearing and I feel it in my pocket, like you said, I go to the shop and I realize that the price has gone up. And I'm going, hang on a minute, this is an hour of my labor to pay for this thing, but it never used to be. Why is that? And then then you start questioning the system. So I think that getting back to the fear aspect is what distracts us from the reality that's taking place. And it's merely levers that, when we say government, I don't think it's government, because I heard the phrase today and I loved it. Maybe we can pick at it a bit, is corporate fascism. So corporations are literally the puppet masters and moving the levers, putting government in a position in which they have to move other levers to try and keep the power and to try and keep things moving. And the difference between government and the corporations will be there forever. But government, like Trump, is an employee for 4 years. That's it. Every other person is an employee for 4 years and they leave office, but the corporations are always there.
Yeah, I think Graham de Penrose is a good friend. He once told me, like, you got two problems. You got big money and you got big government. And in China, of course, it's big government that took control over big money, which is also a problem. But if you have the other way around, like big money can also take over big, smaller governments. And of course, the US is basically run by corporate fascists, right? I mean, let's be honest.
It's all about where the incentive structures are, right? And what kind of reality we're being incentivized to create and who has control of that reality. Like, what I love that you brought up, Hattie, is a few things. One, you talk about indoctrination, which is something I struggle with as a 15-year-old daughter, and people always think about indoctrination in terms of like political ideology. But it's also like the limits we put ourselves in, for lack of a better term, but like this ability to think outside the box, which I remember being explained like frequently in school. But it was so interesting that the teachers who would use this expression did not know how to think outside of the box, right? We're taught to live in a box. We're taught to know how to just control the levers and make the machines operate, but not how to build new machines or to think differently about the problems in the first place. games. You also talk about, like, I love to quote this video game BioShock. This character is actually the villain, but he's this hardened capitalist who creates these basically like bioweapons that enhance humans. But he says, like, when he gets these people to kind of join this organization where they can be superhumans, he says, is man not entitled to the sweat of his brow? And what I mean by that is, you talk about our money in terms of our production, our time, our value, our sweat, like our energy. I mean, that's what's so resonant about Bitcoin, right? It is literally energy harnessed in a token, right? In a coin, and whatever you want to call it. It is a beautiful thing because it is energy, and we give our energy freely to people who mismanage it, who waste it. And if we're educated and aware of how that happens, we don't want to operate the machines anymore. We want to stop these damn systems, right? And the last thing I wanted to comment on with what you said is, you know, when I was younger, and I actually supported Bernie at one point, Bernie Sanders, and people would think that's crazy, like knowing that I'm like an anarcho-capitalist now, right? But of all the options we had in a long time, what I loved about him is he seemed the most human. And I thought, well, you know, it's later I thought, well, it's not going to be a bunch of Bernie Sanderses in the office, even if we get him in, right? But like he seemed to have the right idea, right? And he was all about going after the corporations. This is an oligarchy. You know, how many times has he freaking said that now? And who even takes him seriously anymore after how much he's been over for the Democratic Party after all that they've done to him? But you know, it's very true. It's not my issue in becoming libertarian hasn't been to suddenly support these corporations. It's just this idea that if our government was based off inalienable rights, off things like the non-aggression principle, these corporations couldn't harm us anyway. They couldn't enact policies that maintain their monopolies, that keep them in control, that enable them to be bailed out when they make mistakes. I mean, when we had the housing crisis and that giant collapse, and nothing happened to any of these people who did it. I mean, what does that tell you, right? And that's just another thing that we were talking about earlier. It's we might know it, that something's about to happen. We might think it's going to happen a lot sooner, just like Michael Burry in The Big Short. We're like, look at the math. This ain't mathin'. How is it possible that everything's built on this house of cards, but it's continuing to go? Well, it's because the rest of the normies are out there believing it, perpetuating the lie until they can't hold it up anymore and it collapses. It's just my spiel. I'll let you guys get back into it.
Yeah, no, and I think, you know, for example, when you look at Japan right now with the carry trade, people just don't realize what governments actually do, right? And how it can go horribly wrong. Because right now, when you look at Japan, like you see the currency is devaluing and the rates are increasing. And if you have like a basic understanding of economics, that is like a gigantic red flag. And you know, this is and Japan is you know, as they say, the linchpin of the world economy. So it's like they're pulling the pin out of the grenade. You know, they're still holding the grenade, so they can hopefully put the pin back in. But this can, you know, this can go horribly wrong also for Europe and all, you know, China, the BRICS. I mean, nobody is really happy about such a situation. But yeah, what it actually means is that your debt can spiral completely out of control, because, you know, as the rates increase, it means that the debt refinancing also increases, right? And then as your money devalues, that means that you have to print even more money. But also, if you're like an importing country, okay, for your exports it's nice, but for your imports it's like horribly. You know, if you're importing food or energy like Japan, like, you know, that means that you have to pay even more. And it can stagnate your economy because the interest on your money that you're loaning or lending goes through the roof while your currency devalues at the same time. Plus, if you have debt in dollars, it's also horrible, because that means you can't refinance. So it means that companies go bust, people will lose their jobs, and the only thing to save the situation is then that the government prints even more money, which exacerbates, you know, the whole situation. So, but yeah, people have no idea about economics. And this thing that I just said about Japan, the same is true for Europe. We're also importing a lot of food. We're also importing energy. We're waging a stupid war with Russia, right? So it's a tinderbox. It's a complete tinderbox, and then at the same time, the U.S. is about to cut rates, right? So if the US actually cuts rates, let's hope they don't cut 50 basis points, but let's say they cut 25 basis points.
Well, I think that's what it's being bet on with Poly Market right now, right?
Yeah,
25 rate cut.
Well, the Japanese rates go up. What does that mean for the Japanese carry trade and the hedge funds in the Cayman Islands who are financing the US debt?
That'll be fine. Quit doomsdaying.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's really crazy. It's like it's like you're living through a Monty Python sketch, but instead of being it on TV and that you can laugh about it, you're actually in it. And but it is, 50 years from now, if there's still people around, they will look back at this time and think, what the hell were they doing back then? Right? Yes.
It's economic Dr. Strangelove to me.
Yeah.
It's just a different kind of bomb that's going to go off in the end. Different kind of cowboy riding it on the way down, I guess.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, right? If you look at world history and you look at these big wars, like the Second World War and First World War, but basically most wars throughout history, they sort of erupt around the end of a fiat cycle, because that's sort of how the governments deal with debt issues that spiral out of control. Or you get like a gigantic pandemic that comes out of nowhere, right? So these are sort of things that people have to realize. There we go. Hey, Steve.
Hey, Steve.
What's up?
Anyway, those are my 2 cents.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and lead into, we kind of been jumping around, which is great because these things are all interrelated, right? And that's kind of like the whole point, is we're living in a financial ecosystem where everything is tied together in the most horrible ways possible. But you talked also about the Cayman hedge fund exposure, right? So what happens when Cayman funds dump, right? When they dump their bags. So this was basically another subject we wanted to cover. So roughly 37% of recent treasury buyers aren't governments or pension funds. They're leveraged hedge funds in the Cayman Islands, operating with 10-to-1 ratios or more. This was something I learned a while back too. And I was learning about who we're in debt to. We in debt to China? What are we in debt to exactly? It's like we're in debt to ourselves, right? And also to people who are foreign investors and all across the board. But these aren't long-term holders. They're volatility sensitive traders. The moment the winds shift, they dump. And that's 1.8 trillion in treasuries that could evaporate overnight. So when your safest asset class is backed by offshore leverage, is that really a safe system, or is it a mirage? 37% of these buyers aren't governments. Again, they're 10-to-1 leverage funds based in the Cayman Islands. These buyers will vanish the moment volatility hits. That's 1.8 trillion in treasuries that could evaporate, and the Fed knows this. So basically, anything else we want to add? I mean, especially now that you're here, Peace, and anything you want to add to as well, Hattie. God, I mean, how do we get out of this? I mean, we're not doing the cutting that we need to do. I know even you go ahead.
Dollar stable coins is how we're going to get out of it. Quiet.
A little quiet, yeah.
Is that better? All right. Thank you, Hattie. By the way, Hattie, excellent sweatshirt, by the way. One of the most comfortable pieces of attire I've had, yes.
Excellent. I'm jealous.
Oh, well, you got to have Eric on your show. He may send you a shirt.
All right, I'm in.
But no, the issue with buyers for treasuries is being solved with stablecoin adoption by the traditional finance, like JPM and BOA. That's where it's coming from.
And you need pristine collateral, something like I don't know, Bitcoin or gold.
Bitcoin, real estate. They hold a bit of that too.
Yeah.
So it's not as dire as may seem.
I think my fear, though, is you said real estate in that, right? So, and you said Bitcoin, and like that's another topic we have to talk here, right? The idea of Bitcoin as a hedge, right? Because when these economic systems collapse, it depresses me a bit because I always think, like, especially during the government shutdown, I'm like, this is like our proof of concept for Bitcoin. This is our proof of concept for crypto. Why aren't all these assets shooting up like ridiculously when there's a government shutdown? It's because people panic. They pull out their money. They want to be safe, right? And that affects all markets, right? So there's that. There's also real estate, right? I mean, I sold my house, earlier this year because I wanted to go on an adventure. I wanted to get out of the country. I wanted to actually see the world and basically escape a lot of toxicity that I was dealing with in my country and inflation. And I thought, if I don't take this opportunity now, I'm probably never going to, right? But since I left, I've been monitoring pretty much house prices, and mine's dipped a bit. I almost sold it right at the tip of the market, and I could imagine if things get dire, real estate's going to go down in value as well. So I guess the issue I'm considering and concerned with is, we can say that that we have this collateralization by real estate and other assets, but if values go down across the board, is there any alternative than oblivion, basically? Like if everybody's over leveraged, which is kind of like the crux of what we're talking about today.
Mass deflation or mass deflation, not disinflation, but deflation at that point.
Essentially, I mean, we're talking about like I guess if the dollar were to collapse, I guess you would say that real estate prices would go up, right? Because it would take more money to buy but if people lose value in the dollar itself, that's what I'm kind of saying.
It'll take more dollars, but possibly less Bitcoin to buy real estate.
I think you have like two equilibriums, right? But going from one equilibrium to another equilibrium is a disequilibrium, right? So we're going through a transition phase, and it will be bumpy, right? So there will be moments when there is not disinflation, but like Steve said, deflation, like outright deflation.
That would be a nightmare for everybody, by the way.
Yeah. So, and then of course, because they're governments, they only have one tool in their box, and that is to print, to sacrifice the currency. I mean, that's what you see throughout history in every country, no matter the culture, no matter the religion, no matter the background, they're gonna print the difference. And then, so you will have like a dive, and then gold and Bitcoin and everything goes down, right? That always happens. And also when you look at the chart of gold in Weimar, Germany, even though it was one of the best performing, I think it was the best performing asset. When you look at the chart in Weimar, Germany, it goes like this, right? So it goes up to the right, but it goes like this, right? So, and a lot of people, sell their gold, or, there's uncertainty. And the same will go with Bitcoin and crypto and gold. Because when you have margin calls, like you say, like if you have a deflationary moment and things go awry, or you have a war or a conflict, or political disturbances, or assassinations, or whatever you got, then you got these moments where you get a shock to the system, and then things go down, everything goes down, and then gold and Bitcoin and probably crypto will recover fastest. But they will initially go down, right? And they will go up because governments step in, and because they have to step in.
They'll go down, but they'll also go down relative to the availability or scarcity of dollars with which to prop up the price. So it depends. Like everything's going to kind of remain in some sort. It's more of a psychological shock than an actual physical shock, because the capacity to produce is derived from humans, not from dollars. Dollars is just the incentivization structure. So as long as we have the same amount of people and the same amount of energy available, then it'll balance anyway. Deflation is actually the natural state of technological development. Right.
I'm here to talk about this with regards to Bitcoin, how basically free market principles with free money should be deflationary, and Bitcoin would create that reality if we were reliant on it instead of fiat currency. Yeah, and Nick actually shared that with me.
I think one of the other things that people have to realize, especially if they're in Bitcoin and crypto, is like one Bitcoin equals one Bitcoin, and one crypto of whatever kind of crypto that you believe in is one crypto, no matter the price of that crypto, right? It is what it is. So even though you see your portfolio, tank, if you actually believe in the underlying value of that particular crypto, whether Bitcoin or something else, then you still have the same amount that you had like before. Like
Right.
actually,
The
you can buy
value,
more.
right. The value of your house going up and down doesn't change the utility capacity.
Yeah, that's a psychological element. Like that.
Yeah, of course. That's why I'd rather own a house than fiat for sure. And it's funny too, because then you hear like this argument on that same talk that I listened to. I wish I could remember his name at the moment, but he was talking about Bitcoin, and he also talked about like even judging whether real estate was a good investment, because he compared how many Bitcoin his house was worth like 10 years ago versus now. So it's like the better investment was Bitcoin, was essentially his point.
But you
right?
can't live in the Bitcoin.
Exactly. Unfortunately, I can't just cuddle up inside my Bitcoin and stay warm. Unfortunately, my digital money.
Not yet, anyway.
Not yet, correct. But soon with AI and virtual reality, maybe we can. But I want to comment on something you said, Steve, because productivity. You said it's all okay if productivity stays up. Do you really think productivity is staying where it needs to be? I mean, not just in this post-COVID world where people really don't want to do work anymore that doesn't bring them value. I mean, I'm one of those people. I mean, I work really hard, but you know what I mean? I definitely experienced a major
who wants to do work that doesn't bring them value?
Nobody. But I mean, now nobody's incentivized really to anymore. And too much of our system is based off shitty, meaningless jobs. We're replacing them with AI. People are upset about this because they're like, well, we need to survive, right? And, you have Elon Musk talking about UBI and these different things, but you also have him talking about this idea of a population collapse because people aren't producing enough kids. Like, we're not replacing ourselves fast enough for the growth of any of these systems. So when I see all these things converging, again, the math not mathing in terms of our economy, the people not multiplying and being fruitful like I guess they're supposed to, people being depressed and not even able to afford their groceries, so even when they do work their asses off. I don't know.
I think it was Larry Fink 2 years ago who went on a roundtable discussion with government leaders, and he sort of made the point that governments or societies that have few people are actually in the best position right now because of the AI robotic boom. So, I think, I'm a little bit conspiracy minded or tinfoil hat, but I think all those convergences that you just mentioned, I think they're not like coincidental. Even though you can make a natural explanation for them, because an affluent society will have less kids, and government might want to incentivize having less kids because that increases wealth care costs and all that kind of stuff. So there are sort of like natural explanations for it. But when I look at those things and how neatly they all fit together and reinforce each other, I do also think there was like a bigger plan set in motion some time ago. But that's me.
Well,
I agree.
I would. So to the point of, there's a lot there. We've been reducing the number of children we have in the U.S. for a couple of generations now. Generally speaking. My mom was the oldest of 9. My dad was one of 5.
Wow.
Now I'm a little bit of an anomaly in my generation. I've produced 5. I have 7 children in total. 2 of them are stepchildren. So I've done my
Good
part.
job.
Yeah.
Good job. I'm doing my part.
Yeah, and that's so I often, and I've held this position for a long time. I people like to get into liberal conservative, and I know that's not the case here, but in general, that's the conversations you're having in most spheres on social media, especially with peers. Everyone thinks that you're driven into one position or the other, and so while I may align what they now, not even traditionally because it's new term, they redefine these terms, but I align with conservative ideology on some ideas and liberal on others. As far as the free movement of people, immigration and whatnot, I'm to the left of anarchy. I think people who are otherwise causing no harm to anybody should be allowed to come and go as they will. And we have a lot of mechanisms in place to interject when people are instigating harm against others and whatnot. So I think that we're ready for something like that. But explaining to people that, so the basis of that, by the way, is that I think that humans are obviously economically viable by nature. That's why we've spread, and that's why we've grown, and that's why the population on Earth, it continues to grow, at least in our current understanding of history. So people are economically generative, and no matter and these technologies, by the way, this is something else we were just touching on. These technologies are absolutely increasing productivity, 100%. So they're making people with access to these tools are becoming much more productive. People are starting businesses that would normally take like 20 to 100 people, and they're doing it with a team of 2 to 5. So it's and you would not be able to do that without this technology. But that makes the capacity for individual productivity has gone up immensely in the last decade. I mean, even in the last several decades, cumulatively, we have this massive growing capacity to produce. The government's job is actually to create inflation. So to loan out and borrow and use as much money as possible so that asset values don't decline. It's really a way to protect the asset holder class.
I think one person. So there's a couple of people that I follow besides you guys, of course. But Michael Howell is one. Luke Groman is another one. Jeff Booth, who you referenced earlier. Lynn Alden. But there's also somebody like Richard Werner. And Richard Werner was actually, which is kind of apropos, he was the central banker of the. He came up with the term quantitative easing. It's like from him when he worked at the Bank of Japan. So I'm not sure if he was. I don't know in which capacity he worked at the Bank of Japan, but he worked with them, or he worked for them, or he was one of them. But he makes the point that basically, if governments wanted to solve this debt issue, they could do it tomorrow, right? They can just come together and it can be solved, like with a flick of a switch or a pen, right? Because you can basically, all the non-performing debts or loans out there, they can just put on their own central bank balance sheet where it can't do any hurt, right? Because they can, be in the red for infinity. And what Steve was talking about, and they did it in Japan after World War II, like the way that they got Japan roaring out of after World War II was doing, non-performing loans on central bank balance sheet, stimulate the economy by printing money, but quantitative easing, as he put it, pump it into businesses, small and medium businesses. And then you can get productivity. But if you pump it in assets, and that is what governments are actually doing, or central banks are actually doing, then you pump actually bubbles. You create bubbles, which will blow up at some point. And that's what they are doing. But they could actually do the other thing. Plus, the reason that China sort of went from a backwards country after World War II, which was of course also because of the Europeans and what they did, but was what Deng Xiaoping, he created like a ton of small and medium banks, right? So create more and more banks that service these small and medium businesses, and then your economy roars out of the roars to life, right? So basically, Deng Xiaoping introduced capitalism into China, or Chinese capital. I think they called it red and black cats. And of course, the other visionary thing that he did was, start rare earth minerals, which he said was the oil of the future. Well, China was like 50 years ahead of the rest. But but we could do that, right? And then technically you wouldn't even need Bitcoin or gold or whatever, because then they would be performing less well in that kind of situation. But people don't know that governments can actually do this stuff, right? So people are not asking them to do that. But they could do that, and then most of our problems will be solved tomorrow.
I have a question about that, Nick, because I've heard, I think what I'm hearing you say is they're almost looking at the debt like an asset. Is that correct? Like an asset that can be leveraged? Because this is something that I heard
We're in a new world.
Right. This is something I'd heard someone who's a lot more optimistic about this debt crisis than I am with America. They had referred to the US debt as like the savings account of America, which I thought was the craziest shit I ever heard. But I'm understanding, based on some additional research and what you're saying now, that this is actually true if people believe it. I think the issue and what differentiates this actually working as some kind of productivity booster or some way to actually like drive some kind of investment into the economy or into people productivity. I think the difference between whether that becomes a reality or whether it becomes a spiraling problem is people's belief in it. People's belief that you can be this much in debt and that it even matters. I mean, take a look at the housing crisis, a great example. What it required was people realizing, wow, I'm never going to pay off this house. I am in a variable interest loan that I really had no business getting into. I'm in a home that's too expensive for my means. People who sold me this home were completely incentivized wrong to give me something I couldn't take care of. I cannot pay this off. I'm out, right? And enough people did that to where we had this big collapse. And then, of course, government had to step in, bail this industry out, even though people killed themselves and lost their homes, right? Nobody really even went to jail for all this. It makes you wonder like where that tipping point is. And we all like just speculate on it. We look at these volatility signals. It could be what we talked about with the value of the yen in Japan and people receiving stimulus or bailouts or however you want to call it specifically. We can view it as the debt crisis and the rolling debt. We can view it as instability in people's trust of each other or the rise of government surveillance or this idea of CBDCs being used as a backup option in the event that these dollars end up not being worth what we need them to be worth, and we just need suddenly everyone's money to be tracked. The surveillance systems, my God, it goes on. Palantir. I guess I'm just curious what you guys think that tipping point is. And coming back to Bitcoin, does it always continue to be the hedge that we want it to be, right? Like with BlackRock and Fidelity pushing like ETFs, all these institutions getting involved in Bitcoin. I mean, is that the one risk of this decentralized currency? Is that if enough of these institutions own it, it becomes not so decentralized that they can pull the rug out from us at any minute and just collapse this whole thing? I guess what's the tipping point? How do we protect ourselves?
So it's the network and the design of the network that keeps it decentralized. And so they will be able to manipulate price the more they accumulate. And that will continue because they have more resources with which to do that with. But it's the network that they can't take over the network. You know, it would be too costly. And there's not really any. If the network ceases to be decentralized, then the network ceases to exist to the capacity that they have, that it has been worth them adopting to begin with.
Yeah. The value is in the decentralization gives the network value, right? So that is actually the whole value proposition of Bitcoin in the first place. And I think during the Mt. Gox period, Bitcoin was more centralized than it is now, right? So I think Bitcoin exhibits sort of like a breathing pattern, like that it inhales and it becomes centralized because people, want to centralize it because it's valuable. And then at some point it sort of breaks and then it breathes out again. And we're now in another inhale situation where, this government phase was going to happen anyway, right? It was a phase that we, were going to, because you want adoption, right? And that's the only way to get adoption. So either it will work or it won't work, but I personally think it is our best shot. And I also think when I look at Paraguay sort of came out of nowhere and took like more than 3% of the Bitcoin mining network. I think Nepal, Bhutan, China, Iran,
The African continent.
African countries, right? Why the hell wouldn't you want to mine Bitcoin? Because it's, it makes your energy grid more stable. It expands your energy grid. It makes energy more affordable to people. It creates jobs. It lifts your country out of poverty. So it creates a level playing field. So poor countries suddenly start competing with middle or higher higher level economies. So I think this is sort of like a desperate. I think from a government perspective, or from a US perspective, like a big government perspective, because they're playing in the big leagues. Of course, you want to try to centralize it as far as you can. But I think the technology puts a limit. Every technological revolution sets limits. It sets the playing board, the game board, and you cannot go outside of the game board, right? So Bitcoin and decentralization sets new limits to government expanse, whether they like it or not, right? There are new rules and they will have to play along the new rules, but they'll try to play the old game first, right? That's what they're doing. But going back to Richard Werner, I think we should try for a two-tier solution. Like, I think we should try to wake people up and that there's this Richard Werner solution to the situation, that you actually, that normal banks, your bank around the corner can actually print money out of thin air if you take a loan, right? So these small banks can actually stimulate the economy and create real businesses. So I think that's one tier. And the other tier is that you have to have sound money that can't be censored, that can't be manipulated, which is Bitcoin or something similar. So if you have good money and you do the right things, those two things together, it can actually solve these issues, right? So I think it's not one or the other. I think it's both.
Love it. If you guys are open to it, I think maybe we can jump into a talk a little bit about real world assets. RWAs. Yep. Cool. So basically, there's some interesting solutions that are coming out of the crypto space in terms of actually putting like physical assets on the blockchain. I mean, you've got gold is a great example. I love to tell this story because I recently, before I came here to Georgia, I wanted my parents wanted some kind of like nest egg to bring me home if I like went crazy and lost everything, that they could actually like get me a plane ticket for me and my daughter and fly me home. And I also wanted them to have some savings. Like, we kind of had different reasons for wanting to do this, right? I wanted them to have some savings when fiat collapses, right? Like, this was kind of my perspective, and their perspective was to save my ass if I lost everything. But we came to this agreement that I was going to give them some money, and I wanted them to invest in gold because, to get them to buy Bitcoin would have been it's not something that's tangible to them. They wouldn't have understood it. They wouldn't have been able to manage it. It would have just been a nightmare. So, and then I would have just had to manage it for them. And then what's the point of them having it instead of me anyway? So basically we decided on gold, and they were looking around for different places to try to locate like the amount of gold via with the money that I had given them. And they went to multiple places. Lots of places had extreme markups. They finally found an honest shop. They were able to get about an ounce of gold, a few gold coins, and then a bunch of silver on top of that. But when they were buying it, they were told very quickly that this is not liquid. This is not a bank. I mean, he literally told them, don't come back in a day or two, and it's gone up 10% and expect that you can sell it. And then I've got stockpiles of cash in here to consistently swap gold back and forth like a bank for dollars, gold, etc. Right? And they weren't planning to do this anyway. But again, there's this access control, right? They had to go through all this struggle to try to even find a place that would sell them the gold. Now that they've found a place, they can't guarantee even when or if they decide to sell it, how quickly that they can actually turn it liquid and all this, any of this gold or silver, right? So this presents kind of a unique problem. And you have real world assets that there's been this movement. I mean, we have the token standard, I believe it's ERC 3643, Ethereum, that basically has compliance ready real world assets at scale. This token standard just recently came to Stellar Network as well, because Stellar is really big for offering, on and off ramps to banks for stable coins, but also now they're leveraging real world assets at scale. And basically this idea is to basically try to educate and make more accessible the ability for people, even like your grandmother, to buy gold on the blockchain, because how much easier would that be than having to go around to different stores, different shops, try to find somebody who won't rip you off on some gold when you could just get it via blockchain, right? I mean, if we could make it that easy to
swap that reminds me, did you see the clip with CC and Peter Schiff?
Oh, I saw part of it. What did he? Can you summarize it for me? I saw that they had this interaction, and I guess CZ schooled him. But please tell me.
The entire interview is actually worth it, but they cut it down to 40 seconds because CZ got some gold from I think somebody at Kyrgyzstan or wherever with a certificate and blah blah blah, and he gives it to Schiff, and it's it weighs really heavy, and so and then he asks like, and is it real? And then Peter Schiff's like, how should I know? And that was the clip, so because turned out it was, I believe it was tungsten, with some covering around it.
They did. Well, and that actually begs the question, like, you can put stuff on chain and verify that there's on chain information, but the gold isn't on chain. It's being kept somewhere. And so there's still the whole concept of RWAs. Don't get me wrong. I think that there's absolutely use cases for putting assets on chain or tracking them on chain. Mm-hmm. But how do you know that that's still in a vault somewhere? It's just because it's on chain doesn't mean it's that the supplier or the holder is still a good actor.
Oh, 100%. You have to introduce a bunch of centralized processes to this, right? To even be able to verify the legitimacy of this. And this is kind of like the discussion I sort of wanted to have around this, right? So when I was at Stellar Meridian, there was a panel that was hosted by Camilla Russo. She's manages the Defiant News Network. And she was hosting a panel, basically the topic being, we've tokenized everything, now what? And it got into a section about real world assets. And I was really disappointed that there wasn't a Q&A from the audience, because frankly, like, something that's going to relate this much to like actual traditional finance, I feel like we should be asking questions from the audience about this. But what I wanted to ask so badly was what you just brought up, Peace. It's this idea that what problems are created if we tokenize a house, for example. I know what problems we solve if we can do it efficiently. Okay, for example, when I was like wanting to leave, or I was struggling with money, and I was like, I have $100,000 in equity in my home. Okay, I have a good credit score, I did at the time, but who even cares about the credit score? I have $100K in equity in my house. It's verifiable that I bought this house at this point. It's worth this point. And I could not get a bank to give me $1. I'm not even kidding you. I could not take a collateralized loan for $1 against my home, and I'm a veteran. Okay, like that is like, it was insulting to me that I could not find one person to help me. And they tried to explain, I call it voodoo math, voodoo economics, right? But they're trying to explain to me how this made sense, that I wasn't somebody they could loan to. But I was thinking, like, if I could just put my house on the blockchain, somebody out there would borrow against it, because if I don't pay, I'm out my house, and my house is worth substantially more. But let's talk about the problem now, though. Let's even look at like the housing crisis, right? We had people who were losing their homes, and on their way out, they would pour concrete down the drains. They would smash the windows. They would destroy the fucking place, because they're like, I don't want the banks are just going to get it anyway. These people screwed me over, whatever they think, right? And they destroy the place on the way out. So like all of a sudden, maybe you just verified the price of this house. Maybe, there's a fire and it's not properly insured. Maybe the homeowners do some damage to it that's not covered. Maybe there's termites. There's all these different issues. How do you effectively maintain the value of something that inherently can't be on chain? And I think that's a big problem.
The way that the lenders protect themselves for those scenarios is insurance. That's how that goes. I got my real estate license in 2010. Half of the market was dog shit, exactly like people that lost their houses. Either they were vandalized, like more than half of the houses I was showing for the first 2 years I had my license were vacant, abandoned, no heat, even like not winterized, like just a mess. That it was right in the middle of the beginning of the right in the middle of the collapse. And it didn't get better for years. So what really would go on chain for the house is the title or the ownership record. That's what's going to be the real. Your house isn't actually the asset. It's the ownership right to the house. That's the asset. And there's a couple of different things as to why you may or may not have been able to get funding, by the way, because if you're looking for so I would imagine that in a lot of the conversations, the lenders wanted to talk you into actually doing a refinance instead of an equity line.
Yeah.
The reason for that is because they don't make any money. They don't get paid a commission on a home equity line. They wanted to have you refinance, but you can't refinance if you don't actually have the income showing. You have to qualify.
And why would you want to if you're at a 3%, right? That was my other thing. I was at a 3.2% loan because I bought right during COVID when rates were still so low.
Right.
Like, well, refinance it at 8%. I'm like, well, go fuck yourself. I'm not going to do that.
Right. Right. But they wouldn't. But if you just they didn't want to give you a home equity line of credit because they don't make money doing that.
Yeah. Strange. Yeah, I just remember working for Wells Fargo, and it seemed everybody had home equity loans, lines of credit. It seemed like everybody and their grandmother had them. Literally, their grandmothers had them.
But just sort of to what you also allude to is, of course, with Palantir and the Internet of Things and robotics and all that kind of stuff, right? What they, I think, envision is that they can monitor in real time, 24 hours, every asset and every person on planet Earth, right? I think that's what they, that's the ambition here. I'm not sure if it's realistic. And if
can't they kind of do that? I mean, how many of your purchases are made in cash?
My own purse is small, right? Europe is way ahead with the cashless society, and I do have cash, and I sometimes use it, but in America and Germany, for example, and
you're already able to track all of your transactions. Is my point.
Yeah. Transactions, yeah. But what I'm talking about is like if you're, with the Internet of Things, like when you have a smart fridge, when you have a smart.
Oh yeah, you're right. There's actually a lot more data coming online with that too that they can use to sell you lettuce or whatever.
Yeah, and keep your house, monitor.
Even cameras everywhere too, because that's like a big thing in Georgia. They say like, and again, like it challenges my beliefs, not that I'm for any of this, but it's like I come here with this, Second Amendment mentality. Everyone should be able to get a gun. The government shouldn't restrict this. But, it's very hard to get a weapon here unless you prove like that you have adequate training and such. But, you can walk down the street, graffiti line street. And, I do all the time with my daughter after having dinner. I don't worry about someone jumping out with a knife, much less a gun to rob me, because of what they say as well. If someone were to even do that, there are cameras everywhere. They will get caught, right? So, I mean, but do I exactly like living in a surveillance world like that? Because do I think that it is something that long lasting is safe for people? No. Would I vote for it in America? No. But yeah, I mean, that's the argument, right? It's for your safety. If you're not doing anything wrong, what do you have to worry about, right?
Well, but that's the crux of that situation is yes, we should all. There's nothing wrong with having a safe, secure society, but that shouldn't be. That shouldn't lead to you losing the agency to actually defend and protect yourself.
Yeah, and I think another thing, and that's probably, I think you also talk about that a lot, Steve, and maybe you also, Harry, but like if people were actually all involved in their own community and doing stuff and caring for each other and taking up roles in communities instead of outsourcing it to the government, you would also get a safe society, like the classic old-fashioned way, with human beings and stuff, right? So right, that there's different ways to keep a society safe, and you don't have to keep everyone and everything outside of your door out of fear that somebody will break in. Most people don't even break into your house because they'll go to the one next door because it's easier target or whatever, right? So people live in fear, and that fear is for a large part manufactured in order to outsource your agency, like Steve is saying. And you can create safe societies anywhere, at any place. It's your own choice if you want a safe society or not, and you can just do stuff to make it safe, right? You don't need the government or even police for that matter. You just have to raise good kids. Steve?
That's a huge part of it. No, that is a huge part of it, is being involved in your local community, knowing who your neighbors are, and participating in society that way. But shoot, I got distracted with the thought of my kids. What was I was going to lead into the
You're
it's
talking about safety and fear and manufacturing.
yeah. So it's the way I look at it. We have a government that's supposed to be of, by, and for the people, at least in the U.S. I know that that's not necessarily the paradigm everywhere. Where does the line become the government is more trustworthy? A government of the people is more trustworthy to have access to all of these methods of destruction and violence, but the individuals that make up that society that government is serving aren't trustworthy and aren't able. Like back when they first established the United States, private parties had warships, not just cannons, but warships, merchant warships. There was no limitation. Oh, you can have this, but you can't. That we can have this, but you can't. The capacity that the government has beyond the individual is insane, and they actually do use it, by the way, in our name, and very rarely or oftentimes beyond what most of us would consider to be an ethical and moral use for these things. So how did we get here, and how do we get people back to the conversation of, like, I don't want some rando having a nuclear weapon, right?
Maybe I do. I want to make that argument, actually, when you allow me to.
Well, we can have a conversation. I don't want that, right?
Of course not.
But I don't know where does the point become.
But I think
if they actually aren't harming anybody with it
yet.
Where do I? Well, yet, but you could also stab somebody with a knife. So are you not allowed to have a knife? You can use in a harmful way. So where does the line become?
I'll tell you what I think the line is, okay? And this comes from a book I read, Anarchy, State, and Utopia. I quote it all the time, okay? To me, the moment that government becomes, basically a society becomes a state, that a government becomes formed, it has what is called a monopoly on violence. And this is the intrinsic problem, right? Should an individual have a monopoly on violence? No. Should a collection of individuals have a monopoly on violence? No, really, no. Nobody has the right to harm somebody else because of a set of rules based on people that are fallible. That's why I feel like we need a society that's built on inalienable rights, which starts with us having a unified definition of what harm is, okay? If I own a knife and I'm not stabbing a person with it, it's a problem. Same with a gun.
Harm starts at the initiation of force.
Yes, exactly. Exactly, but the issue here, and this is my argument for nuclear weapons, and I'm making this for everyone to have nuclear weapons, and this is a philosophical argument, okay? And I'm not totally serious about this, but this is like just for debate purposes, right? So if we have a government, right, this is the hypocrisy of it, right? So if we understand that a government has a monopoly on violence, and a government can tell us what weapons and how we can protect ourselves from our own government, which is inherently incentivized to disarm us, to protect itself from us, because it's not us. It's not by the people. It is a separate entity. That is the illusion that it is ours. Whether it's democracy or whatever, you give someone the right to overrule someone else's inalienable rights, there's a problem, and it is always going to be us versus them. You take a look at, even with like the Biden presidency, and don't get me wrong, every presidency, there has been some kind of version of this, right? But you had this one situation where he literally left a bunch of like fighter jets, weapons, etc., just abandoned it, and it was all taken by fucking terrorists, okay? You want to get more direct than that? We have literally financed, our government, excuse me, not we, our government has literally financed fucking terrorists, given them weapons, the same terrorists that we end up fighting in later wars, because it's all a big giant money laundering machine. That's all that it is, okay? These same people, okay, will tell you, Bernie Sanders will tell you, why do you need an assault weapon to defend yourself? I needed to defend myself against you people who armed terrorists who would come kill me when I'm an American. You're arming my enemy. Okay, so you scale that up. That's my argument for nuclear weapons. You're all a bunch of hypocrites, and you're literally using every fucking weapon you can get that I can't to be in defense against me. So why do you really get to say, when you're such a hypocrite, that I can't manage a nuclear weapon better than you? You know, my best argument for that is broken arrow. You guys know what broken arrow is?
Not sure.
It's a term that exists when a nuclear weapon goes missing. Think about this. All right, I was in the Air Force. I've heard these terms. This has happened. It's a real term. It's not. It is a movie too. But it's a real term. Okay, and it exists because we have lost so many nuclear warheads that it's not just to be like, oh, this is the third nuclear warhead we've lost in the history of our existence. No, we've lost so many that we have to create a term for it. Okay,
lost.
So if my gut lost, yeah, that could be so many things. That could be intercepted by terrorists. It could be a sunken ship that we don't recover. It could be like,
sold through illicit means to parties that we want to have them, so that we can then justify a bloated military budget to keep.
For people
just
to
like
live
the Pentagon
freedoms. Yeah. No,
just like the Pentagon lost billions or trillions of dollars before they got hit during 9/11. I mean, come on. I mean,
the day before they announced it the day before, and the office that was investigating it got blown up by a missile that they said was a plane.
Yeah, 100%. And we don't have to put our tinfoil hats on too tight to say that this shit isn't bullshit, right? That these people have no right to tell us any weapon that we can have. I should have the right to have a nuclear weapon if those people can lose one often enough to have a term for what that even means to lose one. I wouldn't lose a nuclear warhead. I'm pretty good at holding on to even my keys. You know what I mean? So like, I'm sorry. Like that's my argument.
To be honest with you, the U.S. military is not as inept as they would want you to believe. To think that they're just they're losing track of trillions of dollars. Sure, they are. Come on. We're not.
There's so much waste in military too, man.
Believe that.
Yeah. No, but I think you do raise a lot of great points here. For example, Nicola Machiavelli was actually one of the inspirations for the founding fathers of America, and he believed that you had to have an armed militia in order to keep the government in check. Right. That's sort of what also inspired John Locke, who was also a very big inspiration on the U.S. government. But during the contract theoreticians like Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, Jean Rousseau, they sort of make different sort of cases for how people interact with each other, right? for example, Rousseau thought that people in the state of nature are like friendly and they help each other, and he wrote a book about it. And that as soon as you have government or society, it sort of corrupts the individual. So that's one take. And then Thomas Hobbes was the sort of the other side of that argument. Like people are in the state of nature are violent, are cruel, life is short and brutal. So you need like an authoritarian state, basically a monarchy was his proposal, in order to give everybody to give that person, that individual, the natural laws, or their natural ability, so that he can rule as somebody in the state of nature, but everybody else has to live in a society. And then John Locke was somebody who thought it was neutral, right? People meet each other in a state of nature, and then they can be cruel or not cruel, but basically they work together and they find sort of an equilibrium.
See, like I would take the first position there, because like that's exactly what's talked about in Anarchy, State, and Utopia, that state of nature that you talk about. And the corruption of it is when somebody in that state of nature violates somebody else's rights, and then you get what are called basically dominant protective agencies that are supposed to enforce the rights of individuals who've been harmed. You could think of it like a funded police department. Does it have to be funded by tax? Not necessarily. I mean, we had educational systems, we had police, we had firemen before we ever had taxes. They can be funded different ways. They can be funded by the person found guilty of the crime, etc. Or we could have an agreed upon tax system, right? Not one that's forced upon us. But the idea is that it starts with something right like that, and maybe you have independent, like contracted security forces maybe that people start with, but then those kind of compete, and then one of them emerges dominant of the dominance, and then that becomes the state, right? And then they have the monopoly on violence, and that's where this whole
regression. So but basically, at some point people have to give up some natural rights that they have in the state of nature in order to create a society and live together and sort of find this new balance. But the point is, there's a balance. Like, you have an arms race. And I think one of the things that happened in the 20th century with these new technologies is that where you had an equilibrium between the citizen and the state, where they were sort of equally matched in sort of power, even though it might not look like that. But for a long time, states needed citizens as human resources, right, to create economic wealth, but also as like in the US, most people are armed, right? So you can't just tell people what to do, because you have this sort of militia principle in the US and also in other places. But I think that arms race got out of whack, right? So the state has now so many powerful weapons at its disposal that it no longer needs subjects or need to listen to subjects. And they have found ways around the subject, like through money, because the money system is broken, but also the law system, through lawfare, the law system is broken, the politics is broken. They now have these powerful weapons, so they also are no longer afraid of the subject. And soon subjects don't have a job anymore. So basically, the citizen or the subject has lost the arms race with the state. So it's out of whack, and that's why also, plus these new technologies, if you give everybody access to them, which theoretically you could do, right? Theoretically, people could build nuclear weapons if they had equal access to the information and the technologies. So also from that perspective, there's another incentive for the state to rule with an iron fist over its subjects, because these new technologies, if they come out into the public, would level the playing field and make politicians and governments obsolete, right? So why would they want to obsolete themselves by giving everybody equal access to these technologies? And then I think the final thing that I want to point out, and I never could retrieve that study, but I came across a study like years ago, and it said that you got 3 types of state, and it sort of also matches the one with rich and well, anyway, it doesn't matter. You got states where there's safety because only the government has the weapons, or a state monopoly. Then you have places where everybody has equal access to weapons, which are also very safe. So those are the 2 extremes, and they're equally safe, very little violence. And then there's the states in the middle, where some people have weapons and the state has weapons, but it's not equally distributed. And those are very dangerous places. And but I cannot retrieve that study, so I don't know if I imagined it. But I think that's sort of So I think if everybody had access to weapons, and I know in certain places in America, the parents teach children from a young age, the danger of weapons and how to use weapons, and like in a very responsible way, teach them that weapons are dangerous and that they can be used for good and for bad. And then you can actually create a society. Like for thousands of years, that was the normal state of mankind anyway. Like everybody had gunpowder, or everybody had a spear or a sword, or So yeah. Anyway, those are my 2 cents.
Well, and I just recall one thing. Fry had mentioned like Bernie Sanders, and Bernie Sanders was, well, what do you need an AR-15 for? Well, my response to that would have been, okay, Bernie, let's pretend you're a thief, you're a robber, you want to come break into somebody's house and steal some money. I have an AR-15. Are you more or less likely to try to rob me? The answer is obvious. Being armed with an AR-15 makes me less vulnerable as a person.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
That's the whole argument right there. I shouldn't have to rely on the government to protect me because they aren't capable of protecting me in that circumstance. They're a lagging indicator. You know what I mean? Like they're coming in after I've already been mugged and robbed and my house has been.
And then you are the criminal, and then you have to prove that you aren't.
Right. God, if I'm armed, then I'm actually vulnerable. Then I'm also extra vulnerable if they don't recognize that as a like. It's just hypocritical. And back to another thing Fry was saying, it all is predicated on. Right now, our current method of organizing society is predicated on the initiation of force by a centralized authority it's not just a monopolization of force, it's a monopolization of the authorized use of force to compel compliance. So we cannot have a peaceful society. That's a violent system. We cannot have a peaceful society until we have a peaceful means of organizing our society. And until we get past that. And so maybe the government is right in restricting the capacity of people to commit violence.
Mm.
But if the government is right in that position, then they should also limit their own capacity to commit violence.
Yeah. I think there should be, controls on government, and they got rid of all the controls that used to govern government. But what's your take, Hedy? Because I imagine that you have a thing or two to say about this.
I have copious notes. I think you guys, I can start by dovetailing into what I wanted to start with. Is we keep referring to government, and each one of you 3 have touched on this point of self-reliance, and we seem to forget self-reliance. We seem to forget we have agency. We seem to forget we have responsibility, and we keep offloading it to government and saying, but the government. But at what point do we take ownership? And that's what we've seen happen around the world with Nepal and people, whether you agree with them pushing government, whether you agree with them coming in. I mean, it happened in the US as well. Whether you agree with what they've done, it's about agency, and it's about us being reliant on ourselves and then coming back to community and being reliant on community. And talking about the collapse of everything in financial institutions, that's us giving away our reliance. So when was it that we gave away growing our own food? When was it that we gave away all of these things? So through legislation, we've allowed it through convenience and because we've made money. And when we talk about jobs being lost, I'm going through the whole thing. When we talk about jobs being lost, that's also us giving away our reliance. So we say the financial system is blowing up. We need to print money. We don't need to print money. What we need to do is we need to take the pill, and we need to be self-reliant, and we need to start from the beginning again and say, you know what? All these other people may have done the problem, but we have to start with ourselves. We have to take ownership, and we have to build ourselves forward again. And as long as we live in victimhood and blame the other person, we're never going to get out of this. We're just giving them to bankroll again. I'm the victim. Please bankroll me out of this. I'm the victim. Please bankroll me out of this. And we've built this mentality of that. And that's the issue at hand. I think with stablecoins, I'm going to take the contrarian, I can't even pronounce it now, the opposite viewpoint. Let's go simple, because I can't get it out. I think stablecoins are the trap. And I think real world assets are the trap. And I think governments create opportunities with a solution to a problem that they've started to lead us into something where we believe that's the only solution we have. While I think stablecoins are amazing, I think going back to what Ray Dalio always says, he says cash is king, cash is trash. You just need to, for me personally, you need to know what's right and what's wrong. When is cash trash and when is cash king? And I think once we lose cash and we privatize currencies, we're in for a world of pain. Governments, I believe, should have currency, not so that they can control it, but so that we can always go to the store and I can put down my dollar, I can put down my euro, I can put down my yen, and it's always accepted. As soon as we say that's gone and we go pure digital, then it's like, I only accept Bitcoin here. I only accept Ethereum. I only accept the stable coin. I don't accept anything else. And then we're locked out of the system and we lose control again. So while I think governments shouldn't have the opportunity to solely control currency, I think we should have currency.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I don't think so. USDC, USDT, those are going to be the US dollar. That's what it seems like to me. That's their plan. It's actually been very effective, I think. They see it as the way to maintain dollar hegemony across the globe, and then they're also setting regulations that you have to buy treasuries to issue them. So it's not 100% privatized. It's just creating I think it's actually opening up the capacity to get off of the cartel, the Federal Reserve cartel, because you won't have to be a Federal Reserve member bank. All you'll have to do is be an entity that can purchase treasuries and issue USDC. And that'll actually broaden the base. It'll actually decentralize dollar issuance. Maybe. I mean, who knows? It could go that way.
Yeah. No, I
It's not backed by anything. That's the problem. You're just taking a
Backed by the full faith
non-backed
of the
entity,
US
putting it
government.
on a different layer. I think the one thing that we maybe need to look at is looking out into the future. The question is, today we have the rails. Today they're privatized. What happens when it's on a government rail and they say you can't access this money? What happens when it's on a government rail and they say your passport that's digital now is no longer valid? What happens when they turn it on you? And then we're looking at real world assets running on a government blockchain. They can tax at transaction. So now because you have USDC, USDT, it's irrelevant. They're taxing at the point of transaction, which may be a good thing, but can also be, hey, tax is now 40% for you because we don't like you anymore. Or, hey, you've got 50% tax, and they just tax it.
Right.
So
like a social credit system, basically.
Well, and the problem therein lies with the current governance mechanism. It's not it's not the financial network. It's the governance model that is so subject to corruption.
And one of the things that Jeff Booth points out over and over again, the government is the way the government is because the money is broken. Right? Because if you can print the money, eventually you will corrupt the government, and you can corrupt law, and you corrupt society at large. And so if you can print the money at will, every government, no matter how well intentioned and how well founded, if it's the U.S. Constitution or I don't care which government it is. If the money is manipulatable, it will eventually go corrupt. That's over and over and over again through society. I mean,
but if it's not, you can't fight deflation as well if you're a centralized economy.
I think the point is what the gateways by which people are able to actually access the money, right? Because I think that's a big potential problem, because we could have Bitcoin, we could have Ethereum, we could have whatever kind of decentralized entity, right? But we know that like inherently paying someone direct with Bitcoin, to try to like scale that into like a payment system, that's recognized by MasterCard or something to buy a soda at a store, right? There's some middlemen that I guess have to get involved, in those middlemen and the ethics by which they run, and whether we're even able to trust them to be fair or to not tax us, etc. There's a lot of power we give up to that, right? And then we have, of course, the compliance issues and government's inherent involvement of who can even be involved in those types of systems, right? And so I did want to address something that Hedy, you were saying, because I love what you say about responsibility, right? And we offload these issues to government, and we don't take ownership of our own responsibility to kind of solve these problems. But there's also kind of another issue, right? Is we've also, and I say we as a society, right? We've already done that though, right? We've already given government so much control over our lives. I was talking about this hypocrisy on a previous show. The fact that the people who regulate us, the people who tell us what compliance looks like, what clean money looks like, what a good token is, right? They are some of the most corrupt people in the world, and they have us by the balls, right? We literally can't do anything in this space without their approval, or suddenly what we're doing is illegal or corrupt and this and that. And then we have to fight through legislation processes that have already been previously established to try to get rights that should be inherent to us. So this is kind of like my question to what you brought up. I agree in the sense that I looked at people every day, many of them on Facebook, who just want to complain about Orange Man, who just say, we got to vote harder, guys. We got to vote all the Democrats into office now. Or, previously we just got to vote all the Republicans in, right? It's always like more government fucking involvement to try to solve these problems, because this is the system, right, that we've been put into. And I've been in this system myself, voting this way and that way for years. And I've just been like, how many more times do I have to recognize that we're not going to vote our way out of this, right? And you can go protest on the street. That's fucking pointless, right? Like, what is it really that you can do at the end of the day? Because, like, I mean, I was a veteran. I served my country. I was at one point somebody who signed on the dotted line that if a bunch of politicians told me to go die for our rights in another country, I was supposed to go do that and be okay with it, right? That's where I've come from, that point to this, to where I don't even live in America anymore. I'm in Georgia. I am trying to escape that system completely. When the time comes, I'd be perfectly willing to renounce my citizenship, because I did not see any way to stay in America and solve the problems that we're having. In my view, it is total annihilation coming. It is economic collapse. And there is a different kind of collapse that's already happening. It's the collapse of society on a fundamental, a personal level, where people are just so toxic and depressed and unable to change anything. I love the idea of personal responsibility, because we even said that in the military, right? It's not supposed to be someone else's fault. It's supposed to be yours. You're supposed to take ownership of it. You didn't fail because your team wasn't ready. Well, it was your team, right? You were leading this team, so it's your fault. You still weren't here on time. I don't care if your child was lagging behind. I don't care if the bus was late. Why didn't you leave 4 hours early if you could not guarantee that you would be here on time? Like, this is kind of like the mentality like that was ingrained in me in the military, and that I treat my business and personal interactions with to this day. People have a hard time pleasing me often. But my point is, this is my mentality, and I could not find a way to even survive in America in the way that I wanted to, and to be free. So what does it look like? And I'm not trying to press you in this. Like, I just want to know, like, from you, Hedy, from the rest of you guys, like, what does it look like to actually challenge these systems and take that ownership when they have us by the fucking balls? I mean, I don't know. I couldn't figure it out.
If I could real quick, just because I got to jump, but to answer that, what does it look like? Honestly and wholeheartedly, I believe that really it looks like just focusing on your own personal stuff. paying less attention to that distraction. Because when you pay a lot of attention, and we talk about it a lot, it's hard to do because it's a lot going on there. But paying it attention gives it power. Making, so I think part of that is it's about self-responsibility. Just do that. Pay attention to yourself. Pay attention to what you are doing. What can I do to make this situation better? And maybe it is getting more involved locally and paying attention at that level. But at the national governance level, at the national, the macroeconomic level, all we really can do is observe those things and have opinions. There's not a whole lot we can do otherwise.
And buy Bitcoin.
So focus on yourself and what you can do there. Awesome conversation, guys. Thank you so much for letting me participate. Great stuff. I do got to jump out, but looking forward to catching the rest of it later.
Cool.
Thank you, Steve.
Yes, please.
Hattie, could you jump in on that as well?
Yeah, I think where I'm coming from is, if not me, then who, is the motto I live by. So if there's something in front of me and if I could change it, how would I go about changing it? And I think what I was talking about there was it's too easy, and everyone does it today, and I think it's a societal thing. It's too easy to fall into victimhood and into, oh, woe me, and I can't change it. And one man is an island, and I can't, you need a team. I think it's, for me personally, it's about what's in front of me that I can change. And I think it's about communicating that effectively. It's about educating yourself and then looking at it. When you say the government has us by the balls, I don't think they do, because those same people who are dictating to government and those same people in government have the loopholes. We can play by the same rules. The difference is understanding what those rules are. And that's by observing what they do and following what they do, and then calling out when that doesn't align with the values and the ethos of the culture I'm in or the country I'm in. Is this what we want to be seen by the rest of the world? Because again, you're in the US, Nick and I are in Europe. I think it's about taking responsibility. And yes,
I'm in Georgia now. I was in America, but yeah, I hear you. I left. Yeah, I left the country, but I am an American still. Yeah, but please continue. Sorry, I'm still listening.
So I think that the thing we look at is where you're alluding to is we sit in a position whereby everything in front of us is dictated to us. I was playing with a thought today around this. We're given processed knowledge, whereby it's neatly packaged, it's not nutritious, and we believe this Kool-Aid that's been given to us that we cannot change. Even though there's societies that are doing that as we speak. 3 or 4 countries have done it by themselves. The youth have taken over and they've decided that they've had enough. The difference in our countries is we just let them and go, well, I have something to lose. I have skin in the game and I don't want to lose it. And that's where it comes to. I have skin in the game and I don't want to lose. So understanding and educating is the only way we can do it. And I think we can use the exact same tactics they use against us. If we want to say to them and us, we can use the same thing to change it. Legislation takes a long time. The wheels need to be greased, but we can change it. And it starts with, as I said, education. But I think we're fed a story that we can't change it. And that's the biggest problem we have, which then puts us in victimhood and we're powerless and we're in a corner. But I think just the 3 of us, and Steve was here earlier, the 4 of us sitting here talking about this means that there are more people like us who want to change, who believe that we can change. And I think that's where it starts, starting with conversation. As much as they try to censor, as much as they try to stop us, is to have these conversations. And I think that's what we are trying to do, is make a change by having a conversation and saying we're not victims, we can change it. And this is how we think we can change the system. And this is what we think is better. Doesn't necessarily mean it is better. We need more input.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And also what you said earlier, like people have to feel the pain first before they sort of wake up to the reality. But I have this sort of incubation cohort theory that you see it with Bitcoin, but also, for example, with UAPs, you have this period where people start digesting a lot of new information because, circumstances, either they lose their job, for example, or they see stuff in the world happening that they don't no longer understand, or somebody in their family has an issue, or one of their friends, and then they start, looking at things in a different perspective, consuming information around it. But that's sort of the incubation period, and then they start talking to their friends, but in private, not in public yet, because it's sort of like you can't go there, and it's sensitive, and people react violently or aggressively to what you say. But with each sort of disturbance or a disequilibrium in the system, a new cohort of people wakes up, right? And they become aware of these issues, and they start talking to their friends in private. But after this incubation period, this sort of bubble bursts, and this information goes public, right? Because then suddenly enough people have been talking about it in private or have been hit by the disturbances, and they take up this conversation. So it spreads very quickly. It becomes small, and then after a couple of years, it sort of spreads. And you see it with UAPs, you see it with Bitcoin and crypto, and you will see it with AI. So we're sort of the incubators of those ideas. So I think like Hedy says, I think there is hope, and I think more and more people are waking up. And if you compare the amount of people that are now talking about it and also the way that they articulate it, it's much, much better than it was like a year ago or 2 years ago. So it's spreading quickly, and it has to reach this sort of critical state. And then it's the question, right, who will win that fight? But I also agree with Hedy that we actually do have the tools to fight back, right? You got, for example, Catherine also Fitz of the Solari report, who does a lot of excellent work to sort of arm people with the knowledge when it comes to laws and regulations that they can leverage in order to give back sovereignty to their community or to their region, that you can actually use the US Constitution to your favor, because they still have to listen to the rules, right? They even though that they work around those rules and that they give lip service to the rules, they are still bound to those rules. They would love to discard those rules. I mean, that's where they're heading. At some point they will get rid of the Constitution. And then they don't have to, then you don't have transparency and accountability anymore. But as long as they're still bound by the rules, they do have to obey those rules if we, the people, demand that enforcement of those rules. So people have to speed up and get knowledgeable about the Constitution and about their rights, and about sort of the obligations of the government to listen to their subjects. And then we can sort of reverse and rewind this process and uncorrupt the system. And of course, you also need sound money, because otherwise the process will start all over again in a couple of years. And you also probably need something like a Werner solution in order to sort of stabilize and control the economy, because otherwise societies will fall apart, right? Because if this bubble bursts, people will not have no time to read the Constitution or, demand their rights, because they'll be fighting in the streets to survive. So we need to sort of have a solution to the economic problem as well. So we need to teach them about the economy, we need to teach them about sound money, and we need to talk to them and teach them about their rights. And it's a tall order, but I think if the pressure reaches a sufficiently high level, people will learn very quickly, right? And then enough people in their surroundings know these things already, so they can just plug into this knowledge, and then then it's just a matter of reaching critical mass, right? And if there's like a non-violent way to solve these issues, then people will choose the non-violent way, right? Why would you want to fight if you don't have to fight? But yeah, it's always darkest before dawn, right? So it will be tricky.
Yeah, I think the one thing I wanted to add, sorry, Fry, was
No, go ahead.
we often forget, because Nick alluded to the governments are not listening to their subjects, and I think this is what I change. I have a different mentality, because I go, who works for who? So does the government work for us, or do we work for the government? And I think those are the questions that we don't ask enough of, is who works for who? Because that flips the narrative of like, hang on a minute, what do you mean I can't do this now, but you can do this, but I have to pay this, but you don't have to pay that? It flips the narrative to think about it. And I think the pressure point, I would change it next to...
I really love that.
Yeah. Sorry, Fry, missed that?
Oh, no, go ahead. Please keep going.
Oh, okay. Nick, I just wanted to say pressure is different to pain. I think when the pain is high enough, people educate themselves because they don't want to feel the pain, and the comfort comes, hopefully the pain is so high that the comfort comes from learning, and then comes action.
I agree, but I hope it can be achieved with pressure, because pressure becomes before it turns into pain. But I totally agree. Pain is a better teacher than pressure.
Yep. Biologically, we're wired for pain. So the pain pushes us to change and to adapt, and then we get the endorphin, which then tells us we're on the right track, and then we continue to do the pain because we want the endorphin.
But I kind of meant the pressure is building, but we will reach that pain level if you keep doing this. We'll get there. No worries.
Critical pain, maximum pain. I wanted to first of all, like everything you guys are saying, I love it. It's wonderful. I want to come back to what you were saying, Hattie, a few things, because like, first of all, to really address this problem, it has to start with our language, right? And you talked about like having discussions about this. The fact that we can even talk about it is profound. And in like my soon to be ended relationship with my ex-wife, like we couldn't have discussions anymore. I was censored in my own home, and it became, what right do you have to say this as a this, that, and the other, to where my own identity became a burden for me. To even be able to communicate on issues I was frankly better equipped to discuss than herself. And it was the type of situation where I realized that this toxicity was happening not just to me, but at mass scale across many people's homes during this time, and continues to happen with people who no longer feel like they can even have discussions about certain subjects. And getting people to actually open up about it and talk about it, whether they agree or disagree, is fundamental to our ability to like actually rise against it in a natural change. Another thing is how we phrase these issues and how we talk about it. Are we talking about it with the appropriate language? Are we talking about it from a perspective of defense or offense? Well, frankly, if the government works from us, we should be coming from offense, right? If we're the boss, why are we asking our subjects, which is the government, why are we asking them for permission, right? We need to change the way we talk and have these discussions. And it's fundamental even to our communities, right? I challenge this group that I've been going to events with them, and I'm not giving them a hard time, right? I'm just giving you this as an example. I love them. They're Eth Tbilisi. They're putting on these great weekly events here in Georgia, the city of Tbilisi, and where I'm living, and they're hosting just such great events. But they made this post, right, because they've been talking about privacy and our rights to privacy, and one of their recent topics was related to, like, it was a discussion between like a privacy maker and a privacy breaker, and talking about the inherent right to privacy, governments fighting against this right, so on and so forth. This post that they made was kind of like highlighting one of these recent discussions. And they were talking about zero knowledge proofs, things like, ZK Cash and so forth, Zcash and so forth. And the question was, is ZK privacy making criminals' lives easier? And I just kind of like flipped that on its head, and I commented, it's making life harder for government criminals to harass their own citizens. You know what I mean? And we have to start talking this way, because like, if we keep being on the defensive with these institutions that are treating us like the criminals, right? We have an inherent problem. I mean, and I'll go a little bit further with it to talk about something that Steve was talking about earlier that I also wanted to comment on. He was talking about how, like, he's left on some subjects, right on the other, which has also changed, right? Because being liberal used to be conservative, actually, which is so strange. A laissez-faire capitalist is a liberal. I'm a liberal. I'm a very hardcore liberal, technically, not one of these liberals today.
I call myself also a classical liberal, right?
Yeah, we're classic. Correct. We're classic liberals. And he was talking about subjects like immigration, people crossing a border. Well, technically libertarians are actually philosophically, logically, we're supposed to be for open borders, right? But and I love having this debate with people because I notice a lot of my libertarian friends, they're I guess very conservative aligned, and they're very for like closed borders, government protection at the borders, and to me, obviously, like we have a big leap to go to even get there, right? Because it's not just whether or not a criminal comes over the border. It's more so like the incentive structures that drive it, right? If you don't have the incentive structures in place, do you really need the same border control that we have? If a person couldn't come over a border and just literally like be a drag on the populace, get free benefits, get put up in a sanctuary city with their own debit card, even be put into houses, like some Democrats trying to enact things like this to give them free housing and stuff. I mean, if there wasn't this toxic incentive to do this, we wouldn't be driving this many people who are coming here just to take advantage of resources. And that's the first thing, right? If we didn't have this backwards drug policy where we actually incentivize trafficking dangerous drugs and even weapons and other things across our border, if we didn't have these oppressive laws in place in the first place, the incentives wouldn't be there for it to happen in the first place. And then you could literally say, I'm sorry, but why do you have to brand me like cattle with the social security number? Why do I need a driver's license? Do you get to assume that I'm a criminal just to cross this invisible barrier when God created this planet, the universe, whatever? You want to say that we're all equal or equitable or whatever, if you even understand the differences between these terms, most of these people who talk about it, right? But do we really treat people as equals or equitably when we automatically assume they're criminals? And government does this in every facet of what they are. It happens when we travel on planes. And I used to think that there was some purpose even to TSA, right? And that myth was dispelled because I have a friend who worked in TSA for years. He told me like some really funny stories. He said one time, so funny how stupid people are, right? So they have these scanners in suitcases, right? It's like, this is how fucking dumb people are. So people would think, oh, I'm trying to get this freaking machete through airport security, right? So I'm gonna wrap this machete in foil so they can't scan it, right? They won't see the machete. And he's like, you look at it on the scanner and you just see a machete shaped like hollow, like shadow, right? He's like, I don't know what they think we're gonna see, but we see the machete, just it's wrapped in foil, like it's so stupid. And then you catch them, and now they have to go through everything, and the person's in trouble because they were trying to traffic a weapon. It becomes this big thing, right? So you got people who are that stupid, right? It's insane. But you also got people who constantly they fail all the time. They have tests to try to catch certain things. It could be tests to see if they'll catch a drug being smuggled through a bag, or a small weapon or something like that. They fail all the time. They fail all the time. And we don't have planes falling out of the sky. We don't have bombs going off, all this shit. I'm not saying we don't need any security, but a lot of this government reliance is purely fear-based. And it's present in our ideas about borders. It's present in our ideas about traveling on a plane. It's present in everything we do. And it seems like the direction we should be heading is education and getting away from all this fear and the government's intentional enforcement of making us rely on fear to basically believe that we can have some kind of successful existence because we're constantly afraid. So we're constantly taking precautions, right?
Yeah, but I think, I totally agree. But I think, good times create weak men. Like, a fluent society has more to lose. We are very safe, and then you also start watching things that or start thinking about. You have the luxury to think about things that can go wrong. So you start imagining all the things that can go wrong. But I think also, by the way, what you said earlier about Zcash, I think you could also just make the point, like, what Solari reporter Catherine Osowitz are also fighting for is just the usage of cash, right? Because they're trying to eliminate cash, like regular cash, like what Steve was also alluding to. which is completely anonymous. And drug traffickers are using it like en masse, right? So we already had Zcash, and we already had Monero. We had it in our pocket, like in our wallets, right? So, and it was perfectly fine, and society worked perfectly okay, and there was nothing, there was nothing the matter. So we already had, we already proved that it can work and that it's not an issue. And then secondly, or thirdly, I think what one of the things that makes it so hard to rein in government is that you have different kind of game theories, right? You got the game theory of Bitcoin, that sovereign states are gonna mine it and own it because they have this huge debt problem that they have to solve. But secondly, you also have different kind of game theories going on at the same time, right? I think you got a game theory going on with AI, you got a game theory going on with space, you got a game theory going on with UAP technology, and you got the game theory going on where they are fighting each other and are in conflict with each other, why they're messing, why they're doing all this stuff with us, because they're trying to, get us in a fear mode, because then we're easier to control. And they need a controlled society because they're in competition with China's in competition with the US and Russia and Iran. So they want their population to be fearful and afraid of these different societies, because that's another thing that we haven't even touched upon. But you got a lot of fear that's based around religion, about culture, about each other, right? And when you actually look at those societies that we're so afraid of, it turns out that the people living there are actually pretty nice people, and they're pretty okay, and they're not as dangerous as our governments are make them out to be. Like Iran is pretty. There's a lot of really nice, decent people in Iran. I would say like the vast majority of Iranians are very well educated and very nice people. So why the hell are we afraid of Iran, right? So or Russia, or fill in the blank. Or vice versa.
Totally.
Or America.
Totally. I had this experience recently. I was dating a woman here in Georgia who was very racist against Turkish people for so many reasons I don't have the time to really go into today. But it rubs off on you when you like have someone telling you this negative crap over and over again. Yeah. And I had like a short stop in like a Turkish airport. It was actually in Istanbul. And it was like, I happened to be in the very crowded airport. My layover got extended, and I had a couple uncomfortable experiences, and I can almost feel my mind going that direction, right? And I talked to my friend about it, who had recently gotten back from Istanbul. He actually met up with a dev friend of ours that we used to work with a while back and had this great time. He went out to the clubs there. He said it's crazy because the way we're indoctrinated in America to kind of think about Turkey and even other countries, right? Like, why would you want to go to another country? America, you want to learn U.S. history. We didn't spend a lot of time really focusing on geography or other countries and other countries and their political beliefs and systems. We spent some time, but not enough to really know where like this country is in relation to this one. But Turkey, I feel like, if you've ever seen Midnight Express, like that's kind of like what my perspective of Turkey was as a whole, right? Like, pardon me saying, I'm not saying this as like, this is how I feel. I'm saying it's the perception of what it is. It's like a shithole country, so to speak.
That's what they do. Like perception management is like a very big part. Public relations with Edward Bernays, like the nephew of Freud. They turned that into an industry, right? And also when when they do the development of new products, and they have these sessions which are basically based on Freud's free association, where people sort of tell what comes to their mind when they look at a vacuum cleaner or whatever.
Yeah,
and then they use this knowledge against you, right? They weaponize this knowledge against you to sell you vacuum cleaners that you don't want to have. So, and the same is what they do with populations, and I think that's why the CIA is so much involved in Hollywood, and why they make tweaks to scripts, because managing the public perception is key, right? That's like super important. Walter Lippmann also mentioned that. He was a nice guy, but he also mentioned that perception management is key for governments and societies, and that's some people have to become aware that is the case and that it's happening, and it's not all bad and it's not all done on purpose, but it is something that you have to be aware of, that and you have to step outside of that bubble in order.
Correct. And it's hard to get out of that bubble, because if you don't watch TV or you don't watch the movies, if you understand that this happens in Hollywood, well, you're still going to be influenced by other people who do. Right.
Yeah,
and my friend's perspective was basically this, I'm telling him about this bad experience. Like, I just had a nightmare experience just on a layover. He's like, don't let that like taint your perspective of the country. He's like, I was there. I met a bunch of really wonderful, amazing people. Any place can have their backwards beliefs or their problems with government, just like America, right? It doesn't mean that the individuals who live there are all that way. And it reminded me to be careful about who I allow to be into my life, because like I'd spent some time with this woman, and some of her hateful beliefs, whether or not I was aware of it or not, were starting to influence me in some way. And it's definitely very problematic, for sure.
Yeah, and then even, in case, for example, your wife, I don't know her, but, I've also met people like that, but they are actually also victim to this sort of brainwashing that's destroying their own lives by sort of adopting.
She listened to a lot of TikTok too.
Yeah. So that's also an issue, right? So like Graham de Penrose pointed out, like everything, basically they don't want to wage war because it's too tricky and too dangerous with these kind of weapon systems. What they want to wage is like war against their own populations, because that's kind of safe, and you can manipulate them on almost every level at the same time. So every aspect of life is being weaponized against us, and
like an ideological battle rather than just a physical one.
And financial and educational, like it's like every domain is being weaponized, and people have to become aware of that fact. And technology is also being weaponized against us. TikTok, for example, like you just mentioned. So
100%.
Yeah.
I was going to lead into. Yeah, I was going to lead into, and we'll keep jumping across these subjects as long as we have time. You guys want to stay on. We were going to talk a little bit as well about some political leaders globally. So, there was a couple interesting things. Because again, we don't want to be relying on governments. We want to be relying on individuals. And I think, Hattie, to your point, this is more evidence of that fact, right? Because we make heroes out of different people. We endorse different people for different reasons at different times. A big influence in me becoming an anarcho-capitalist was actually Javier Milei, and that's its own kind of story that I'll just touch briefly. When I came into crypto, it was back in 2020 during DeFi summer. And, granted, I was against government on both sides. Like I'd always had kind of like anti-government philosophy in line with my grandfather, who owned a mining claim. He had a bunch of hidden assets that he kept from the government. He struggled with them left and right. But he also was more aligned as a Democrat than anything else, because, in his time, he saw kind of like the authoritarian issues of the right. And that's just where he particularly stood. And, socially, I've always been more aligned left. I don't have a problem with someone being gay or whatever. I don't give a shit, but like, that's just the way he was. And I always felt like a lot of resonance with him. But he always had these kind of like government issues growing up, and like I always kind of like aligned with him. And then in 2020, I had been, when I first met my wife, I had been a Bernie Sanders supporter. I wasn't sold on Biden at all, because I knew about him from back in the rave days when he was introducing like the Rave Act, which was basically all about coming after promoters for things that guests would do at the shows. So somebody overdoses on Molly, suddenly I'm responsible as an event host for hosting the event. To me, it was very authoritarian, and just one more way that they were trying to prevent us from free expression. You know what I mean? So I never liked this guy. But like I had 5 years to kind of watch what Biden was doing to the country, to see like what atrocious hypocrites the left was, and to also recognize that I was not aligned with these son of a bitches at all. And I did not know why. I had been so convinced that I ever was. I mean, I was like, if you're against government, they're for government, they're for more government. What are you doing? Like, it economically didn't align with me. And I started to realize, or like philosophically didn't align with me, but I also didn't understand economics then. And then I started to realize once I learned economics that most other people who are involved in politics don't even understand economics. But this all started with a fucking meme coin. Okay. I was looking for the next big win, and I had just heard about Javier Milei, and I had actually heard about him on the Tonight Show, and how he would show up with a chainsaw and talk about cutting down government spending. But he's like this, what they'd sell as like an extreme right-wing anarcho-capitalist. Like, my God, this guy's worse than Trump. And I was like, I took interest. I'm like, who is this guy? He's got his wild hair and he's talking about these leftist sons of bitches. Like, he's such a character. I just took interest. I couldn't not, And I discovered shortly after he won that there was a token project called Malay, Monetary Implementation of Libertarian Economies and Ideologies. Like, it was so cool. And I was like, this is really interesting. And the token was at like 10K market caps. I threw $1,000 at it, right? I mean, I had some really good plays. And I was like, my God, there's no way that this doesn't blow up. The guy's going to be inaugurated in like a week or two. People are going to be jumping into this. And I remember when I bought it, somebody said, who in their right mind would throw $1,000 at a meme coin? I'm like, people are going to throw a lot more at it really soon. And I shit you not, there was a period when Trump and Milei were shaking hands. That token hit 5 million. And I had sold off and on little bits throughout, and I always felt guilty whenever I did, because in the process of being invested in this token project, I became in love with libertarian politics, with discovering myself as an ANCAP, with these community members who cared so much that it was like I didn't ever want to just dump all my bags at the high point. I did want to see it hit 10 million or $1 token, of course. I wanted to see it go even bigger than that. I wanted it to actually make some kind of movement for the libertarian like philosophy, to actually get more people to get engaged with it, because that's what it did for me. Is I came in being like, I'll be able to sell this because it's just a bunch of Trump loving people I can dump on when I'm ready to. And that was not how I felt at the end of it. I was like, this is a community of people that I respect and I don't want to hurt them. And I did sell eventually. I made like 55 grand. So, I mean, I did make a lot of money, but I mean, I could have made a lot more. And I actually like learned a lot about myself and found quite a hero in Javier Milei. And I preface all this because I'm very disappointed by what his presidency has actually been. And if I start to go quiet, let me know, because I'm going to have to charge these up for a minute after I finish, and I'll let you guys talk on this for a bit. But, I'll start with this. So Javier Milei won hearts with Rothbard quotes and anti-central bank fire. But after taking office, he signed a $44 billion IMF deal, approved beef for dollars diplomacy with the U.S., and backed state surveillance and centralized crypto token plans. His free market campaign now looks more like authoritarian compromise. Libertarian branding met statist execution. So what does this mean for crypto adoption and true freedom movements in South America? The disconnect is loud and dangerous. He quotes Rothbard, but signs IMF deals and censors critics. I mean, I dated a woman in Argentina briefly. It was quite an experience. And she was very leftist. And she also expressed to me a lot of her own frustrations with him. And I always have been the type of person that I can disagree with you politically. If we can have a discussion, we're good. I respect people and I love hearing ideas, and it never was a burden for us to have this political difference. But one thing that again relies on the belief in the free market principle of free speech, because it's not just about free trade, but like our words, our ability to exchange these words right now and not charge anything for them and not require government to come in and say which words are okay, which words are not. These are all free market principles. And I'm sorry, but you could be a communist, you could be whatever. If I believe that you need to be censored, then I'm not really truly believing in free market principles. And this was kind of the crux of what she was talking about, is that he's censoring his critics, which isn't very free market of him. So that's kind of where I wanted to lead into this discussion today. I mean, and not to mention how it impacted our token community. He launched this Libra token, which he had personal interest in, and basically screwed over a bunch of people. And he knew about our token. He liked the token many times, and he never took the time to actually retweet us or even say, like, this is a token of people who actually have been in and supported us. He basically got us dumped on by launching Libra, and then dumped on his own supporters. So I don't know. I think that plays into what you're saying, Hattie. Like, we can't trust these people because there's nobody we can really put up as our Jesus to come save us, right?
I don't think it's about a savior. I think if we put all of our control and our ambitions in another, then we're setting ourselves up to fail. So, and the story there, which is left with Nick, it's the same as Africa. So I've seen the story play over and over and over again, and it's exactly the same that's played out in South America, where the big story is they're going to save you, they're going to make everything better. And then, I mean, a classic example is South Africa. ANC came in, whirlwind, everyone loved them. They were the heroes of the entire globe. They stopped apartheid. And now look at the country now. It's literally gone only one way, even though it's still the largest economy in Africa.
Yeah.
It's crazy. I mean, even Johannesburg, the capital, not the capital, sorry, the biggest city, it has, as far as I remember, has larger economy than other countries in Africa.
Wow.
It's that big. Like, that's how much money they're making there, but it doesn't function. So
no, yeah, I think the Messiah complex or the Savior complex is actually a big, also in the West, right? As a rule that I think that's basically what we already touched upon many times, like the dependency, and that people outsource their agency and responsibility to somebody else or some institution or government or group, and in order to save them, right? So, and that we give them our agency or our money or our time or energy, and then we think things will be magically fixed because we can't do it ourselves. So yeah, I think that's a trap that people keep falling into. And also, when you sort of think about it, also with celebrities and the worship that celebrities nowadays get is really crazy when you think about it. That children, but also grown-ups, are sort of thinking like, this person is sort of like a magical person who it's like idolatry basically that's happening, and that you think like, why am I spending so much time and energy investing in that person who doesn't even know me and who would throw me under the bus at first if it was necessary, and maybe they're not that bad, but it's kind of silly when you think about it, that people have this sort of innate urge to put others on pedestals and worship them as demigods or as gods. But I used to like Millet. He said the right things. I think there's probably a huge libertarian constituency out there, probably with a lot of money. So he wanted, of course, to get rid of his leftist opponents. So if you use a chainsaw, I mean, that's basically also what Elon did with Doge, right? If you cut them off at the root, at the financial root, you get rid of a lot of opposition and you use libertarian arguments to get people to play along, and then you're set. Your group is set, right? So I think it was a smart play, and I think he's probably not completely opposed to libertarian ideas, but he's way more a conservative. And not conservative, yeah, so sort of like the bad kind of conservative. And he also put, he lent out the gold to London, which was also like on red flag. And I think Fry also mentioned, working with Palantir. So the way I look at South America and what's happening there, because you also have El Salvador, and there's a lot of other groups and countries that are sort of behind the scenes are very positive about Bitcoin. And Milei was also positive about Bitcoin, but he sort of made the argument that you have to have this step in between in order to move to a bit, which was probably nonsense, but many people followed his logic. But I think you basically in the West have a big fight going on between the left statists, let's call them what they are, and the right statists. And the right statists, they promote strongmen like Orban in Hungary or Milei in Argentina, and they're allied with Trump. So you got Team Trump on the right, which is aligning these countries, and the countries that are not listening, like Venezuela, for example, which is clearly a leftist statist country, are being invaded because of a drug problem, which is much bigger in Mexico than in Venezuela.
It's not a drug problem. There's a reason for it.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like it's nonsense, right? So it's basically a coup. That's what it really is, and a message to everybody who might think that they also want to rebel against new policies from Washington. But I think they're trying to align Europe, but mostly South. And there was actually also I saw yesterday I saw an episode from Fat Guy Joseph Wang, who does like a weekly sort of recap of macro news, and he mentioned that I think Trump or the White House put out sort of like a bulletin on Europe, and that in that messaging from the White House, they actually said that they will work with groups in Europe in order to change. What was the wording? I forgot the exact wording, but to paraphrase, to make things move in the right way. So basically, what you got here is like classical Cold War situation where you got the BRICS on the one hand, and US and its allies on the other hand, and you got realignment wars going on all over the place. And that's what's happening. And they want South America. I think they want Canada, South America, and Greenland, and then an alliance with Russia. And then you have a circle from North to South Pole, which is allied. You can launch spaceships up and down. You have got all the resources, all the energies, all the rare earth minerals. You got the knowledge and the expertise from Russia and the resources, of course. And if you have Russia and Canada and Greenland, then Europe has to follow, because otherwise they're sandwiched, that there's no alternative basically. So then you isolate China, and it's like a 3-part game. So if it's always 2 against 1, so now it's Russia and China against the US, but then you isolate China. So I think that's what's really going on with Milei. Is he's a puppet, he's a Washington puppet, and they got a nice packaging, a libertarian packaging, but they discard the packaging as soon as they are in power, and that's it. That's my take.
Yeah, I think they're doing exactly what China is doing. Is they're trying to increase their area of influence, and they're making sure that South America stays in their area of influence.
Yeah, it's their backyard.
Correct. And Venezuela is more about oil than anything else.
True.
So the US has light crude oil and they have heavy crude oil. And this is the problem. And the US doesn't want to bow down to Russia. So Russia being the next one, and they don't want to bow down to the Middle East. But if they have an oil well in their back garden, why would I go anywhere else? I will just make sure that my area of influence is here, and I can go fill up my car whenever I want. It's very easy to go across and just fill the car up and bring the car back. So I think that's keeping the other states in South America in line means that why is this one not in line when everyone else is playing nicely?
Yeah.
Like, why are you the odd one out? So it's about encircling somebody.
And I think the big. I'm still writing this piece. I started like months ago, but I still haven't finished it. But it's sort of, I just thought sort of the idea behind it. But I think for me, sort of there were 2 sort of giveaways, right? The first one that he was saying that Canada should be annexed, and that was like, wow, why you hear a U.S. president saying something like that? It's like, wow, it's like mind-blowing statement actually. And then the second one was that they renamed the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. I think that sort of tells the bigger plan, right? So that will be their inner sea. It's filled with rare earth minerals. Then you want everything around the sea to be at least in your sphere of influence, and everybody has to bow down to the policies from Washington. But then Venezuela is of course the biggest roadblock there, and also a Chinese vassal state, plus loaded with crude oil, like you say. So then you do a regime change, classic regime change, right? If somebody doesn't listen. So, and Milei is already sort of on board. El Salvador is also on board. And then El Salvador is, of course, an interesting case because they do have the closest thing to a Bitcoin standard that you can get. So that's an interesting case in itself. And then there's a lot of other countries who are sort of saying that they are making positive sounds towards Bitcoin and stable coins. And, so that will be, I think South America will be the new Europe in a couple of years, and Europe will be the new Middle East in a couple of years. So the problems from the Middle East and I think Ukraine will be the new Israel, weaponized to the teeth if Russia can't, destroy it in time. So that's sort of the new layout of the land, and that's the great game that's being played right now underneath our noses.
Yeah, well, crypto and stable coins are playing against BRICS. That's what the US is doing. Sorry to jump in there, Fry. They're trying to counteract BRICS.
And that's why China, of course, says stablecoins and RWA are very dangerous. They are, of course, but they're especially dangerous to China because they can't control it. And if everybody pours into them, it's like they finance U.S. treasuries, and of course, Bitcoin is also part of Tether, and these other. So it will be treasuries, U.S. treasuries, gold, and Bitcoin, right? So
and that's the counter argument for the other side.
Yeah,
US can't control BRICS, so it's these two. We need a bridge. We need that bridge because if both sides are pulling that bridge, then we've got a way for the economy to keep going, the global economy. So we need that tension on that bridge to hold both sides. If one lets go, the bridge collapses, and we all suffer.
So they all don't want that. And that's also why I think I think you said it also earlier with Bitcoin. So Bitcoin will be decentralized because in this new world they need something that's truly decentralized because they don't trust each other, right? So you need a collateral, something like gold, but since gold and silver are going to be obsolete with the AI robotic space revolution that's just around the corner, and then you need all the shiny metals to conduct electricity you can get your hands on.
Gold's finished, silver's finished. It's all in an asteroid that's going to come past us. We're going to go mine the belt. So Bitcoin is going to be the most. I've said it we had the conversation. For us to be spacefaring nation or a globe, like a planet, to be interstellar, we need a way to communicate in monetary terms with each other. So it was inevitable that we would have a digital currency and we need to both agree to settle it. And one thing I heard was Bitcoin is actually a measurement of time.
Yeah.
So in order for me to send money to Mars or in our solar system, it's going to take about 10 minutes to verify that. So Bitcoin is the perfect platform to be able to verify a transaction that we can all agree on. It's a long enough time period to move it across I think it was our galaxy would take about 10 minutes if we burst.
Yeah. So there's a lot of interesting stuff going on there. And then, of course, the Space Force that was launched during Trump 1, which is, becoming the new Air Force. And if you put all these things together, like the AI war is, of course, also connected to the UAP war, which is connected to the Bitcoin and crypto war, which is all connected to disclosure and going into space. So, and you got these different kind of blocks that are fighting for dominion, right? This new dominion that is, it used to be he who controls the seas controls the world, but we're now moving one level higher. It's like he who controls space, in effect, the moon controls this solar system, basically, at least if you are the only ones here. But yeah.
Well, if Bitcoin is what, time and also energy, right? Does that mean whoever controls Bitcoin controls the universe? I mean, I don't know. It makes us kind of think if that becomes our global means of, or our universal means of communication. I mean, if we really want to think big enough about it, like owning Bitcoin is a bigger deal. But what you said scared me a little bit because I'm starting to think I should dump my gold. Like maybe I need to get my parents to dump their gold. But I think we have a lot of
Like we,
time before that becomes an issue.
like we said at the beginning, it goes slower than we think and faster than most people think. So I think we still have like a 5 to 10 or maybe even a 15 to 20 year window here.
Yeah, I would imagine we're still going to experience a lot of growth, especially if we do have some kind of fiat collapse. I think what people will embrace initially will be gold and silver, I would think. You know what I mean? As like these are some fundamental assets we can go back on as stores of some kind
And they
of
still
value.
have the best part, right? Because you will have a blow off top. You know, as Bitcoin and silver become an industrial metal, you will have a blow off top because it will be a monetary demand and an industrial demand at the same time. So, you know, it will there is somewhere along that road is a blow off top that we haven't seen yet.
I think it's the
Yeah.
difference is paper. Have you got paper gold or have you got actual gold? That's the difference. So if you're playing in paper gold world, then you might have a problem. If you've got real, that's something completely different. And I think, like as Nick said, we're going to have a convergence whereby we have an AI revolution coming, and we're going to have to build towards that. And we're going to need these industrial metals in order to push ourselves forward, even into space. And there's going to be a squeeze on that we don't have enough, especially.
We can't imagine. I think the squeeze.
Yeah, because
I wouldn't be surprised if it goes to 20K. Yeah.
Well, once that paper gold suddenly disappears, then we're going to have a real problem on our hands, and the price is going to go because we're going to realize that we haven't got as much gold as we think we have, or we could have the opposite of diamonds, and we have way more than we thought we did. There's two ways it could go.
Yeah, and that's also why I think China is pushing for a gold bricks currency, which I think just launched, right? Or the unit or whatever. I saw a message come by, but anyway, because if you can actually, create gold out of thin air, you are doing the same thing as with the fiat standard without, like we said, like you can link it to gold, but who can verify if the gold is there and how much gold there is? Like if you can pull it out of thin air, you have infinite amounts of money theoretically. Yeah.
It's interesting. Yeah. And basically like bringing it back to essentially like this big global plan. And, we kind of jumped into Trump a little bit. I wanted to ask, like, where do you see current U.S. economic policy fitting into this? I'm curious from both of you, because, we have tariffs, right? And we have Trump kind of coming out there and talking about how overwhelmingly successful tariffs have been, which they have not. How you measure that can be so many different ways, but to say that we're going to be giving people major tax refunds next year because of tariffs doesn't seem to make logical sense from how much has actually been generated from them. Additionally, when we look at tariffs as a tax that we pay as U.S. citizens, well, okay, so we're giving us our own money back, okay? But then there's this other thing that Trump's been talking about, right, which is the elimination of the income tax. Don't get me wrong, I hate income tax, and I'm already thinking about 100 million different ways I can benefit from this if it happens. But there was someone posting about this on X recently, and it's gotten a bit of traction because those in the know are aware that it's not just simply like, the Ron Paul vision of this is bullshit, we're just going to get rid of it and replace it with nothing, right? Yeah. It's not going to be that way. It's like we're going to get rid of income tax, but now we're going to introduce a consumption tax, right? It could be as high as 30%. So you factor in tariffs, you factor in this consumption tax, suddenly, everything you buy comes at a very heavy cost. Now, I talked to my parents about this, who've been, I think they're a little disappointed in some elements of Trump, but they've probably been the most rational people I know to kind of still be on Trump's side through all this, in spite of some things that did not exactly go the way they hoped. And a lot of individuals, rightfully so, continue to argue, well, how would things have been under Kamala Harris? And I can't even begin to debate that one with anybody. So, I mean, I get it, but what their view is, well, that would be fucking great. For one, they're the type of people who are in this very uncomfortable spot of the, well, mid upper class, more like middle class, but upper end maybe. But they've always noticed that in spite of what they take in, it shoots out their asses in taxes, basically. They've had issues with the IRS their whole lives, which is a big reason I hate the government and IRS myself, as I saw how much my parents argued and had so much stress and anxiety in their lives because of taxation. And, I view taxation and an entity like the IRS as the ultimate act of aggression, because your ability to tax people out of their own wealth, which I've had family members who've had to sell parcels of their land till they lost their land strictly because of property taxes. You know what I mean? Like, you're not just affecting a person's wealth, which you might just think of in terms of money, but their ability to fucking reproduce. I mean, whether or not it's, I'm going to go to this bar and take a woman home with me, or whether it's, I've been dating someone steadily for 6 months and I still don't have the income to support a family. When you take someone's wealth away from them, you effectively remove their ability to live forever through their children. That's really how seriously I think about it. But I'm getting to all this because they support this because of that view, because they've lived through this, because they are the people who every year don't get money back on their taxes. They always owe more, right? They would love the IRS to be gone. They would love there to be no income tax. And now that they're kind of entering their golden years, they don't consume as much. They wouldn't like their groceries to be any more expensive than they are, but they'd live with it if they didn't have to pay tax. They've already bought the car they want to buy. They're already in their house. I mean, they if they move maybe one last time, they're hopefully going to do it before any of this even takes place anyway. So to them, this would be a net win. But I had to explain to them how many people, especially people on the lower income spectrum and the other ends of the middle class, like, it'll actually effectively eliminate the middle class, because people who are living paycheck to paycheck, they're also heavy consumers. And it's not just because of the concept of them needing the latest iPhone or this and that. It's also the fact that these are the people who take loans. These are the people who constantly have to get new vehicles or rely on public transportation to get to their jobs. Their cars are breaking down all the time. They're having to bring them in for servicing all the time because they can't afford a newer model, and how this affects loans. And then you got Trump introducing 100-year mortgages or some shit. I don't know. It's getting pretty fucking wild. But my point is, how does that factor in and converge? Because in my view, if there's going to be such heavy winners and losers, and you're going to penalize people who consume in the United States, you have just created the ultimate incentive for people to offshore. And this is going to be my one pitch for myself, but I handle offshoring with the Vitality Agency here in Georgia. So if you're ever looking to offshore, now's the time. But seriously though, like, how does this all come together in being some kind of economic benefit for America? How does all these other things that we're talking about, tariffs, what Malay is working on, this global surveillance state, this means of control, CBDCs, how does this all like culminate? Where do you guys see it, I guess, going from here?
You want to go first, Hedy?
Yeah. So I think the US is in the early stages of capital control. And I think stable coins are going to be a form of capital control. I think tariffs would take longer than Trump's term to actually see the benefits to America if they really wanted to convert. And it really would require a lot of people to reframe the way they think about things. I think tariffs ultimately are going to make America more self-sufficient. So I think that will force re-onshoring. And I think it will make as a country, it'll make it a lot more secure because it won't be as reliant on the rest of the globe. And I think ultimately it will, the American people would need to suck up that pain for a while because it's going to be painful to transition. I think possibly AI together with robotics can solve a lot of the problems and shorten that time span for you. But it depends on the greed of corporations, of how that plays out and what special treatments are given. And I think the biggest problem with America is there are two classes. There are people who get a hall pass and people who don't get a hall pass. And when you talk about taxation, that's one of them. So I think there's not equal access yet in the US. And there's not a level playing field. But I think ultimately the tariffs will work if given enough time. And I think it will create more self-reliance. But I don't think the Americans are ready, as people, are ready to take the risk without understanding what the consequences will be for the next generation. I think that's ultimately where it lies. And taxation, I think we've got used to taxation around the world. I don't know if there's another way to do it, but I also think that stable coins are going to be the next form of taxation. I think your tax is going to be built into your transaction, and that's how the government is going to feed itself through every transaction. So just like networks now with Bitcoin, we pay the miner. I think we're going to get to the point where we're going to pay the miner plus the government. There's going to be a tax built into things. So we'd have to pay, and we won't even see it. It'll just automatically be taken off. And that'll be convenient for all of us, and then they can dictate that price.
And I think
dystopic.
Yeah, fundamentally, I agree with like a lot of what you're saying in terms of where this is going. I mean, as an ANCAP, you know how I feel about taxation and tariffs are taxes, but I get what they're trying to do is they're trying to, I mean, the idea is to incentivize production in the country, right? I understand that. And fundamentally, if you create those incentives, the goal is to bring everything in. It's just right now, I think what people are definitely focusing on, if we're just looking at that aspect, if we even believe that the government can institute tariffs and actually force people to move their businesses back to America, if we actually believe that, we also have to say, are people going to stay in it long enough to reach that end? Are they going to be comfortable with it? And when people are already uncomfortable with their grocery bills, and it's so far resulted in more, expensive costs for consumption to people locally, I think that's kind of the question, is whether or not they're going to stay with it. And that's where kind of like, if you loop in this idea that we're going to get rid of income tax, and again, we can't just do that without introducing something which, they've said, this conservative commentator who posted about this, like, the idea is to replace it with a consumption tax, right? Now you're looking at products might be, if we're being conservative, might be, let's just say 20% more expensive, which is bullshit. We all know that inflation's way higher than they've actually told us it is. But let's just say that...
They haven't even started QE yet.
Yeah, let's just say that it's 20%. I'm being conservative here. And let's say we had a consumption tax of 30%. So we're going to raise prices by 50%. From people who already can't afford them now. And we're going to introduce longer loan periods to put people in more perpetual debt. And we think people are going to go along with this. Maybe they will. Maybe I underestimate the human capacity for pain and masochism. But I don't know. I don't see it working out, especially if these two ideas converge. But, again, I wouldn't argue that myself, that I have the best full grasp of how the economy works. And I'm not saying that to dispel my understanding of it, which I think is better than most, but there are just individuals who understand these inner workings of debt and incentive structures, and on a global scale, that I just have to argue is better than my own. But just like with just a fundamental understanding to it, it does not make sense to me. Like how...
The way I look at it is like this. So we already established what Larry Fink said a couple of years, like when deglobalization started, like that the countries with small populations are in a better position than those large countries with large populations. But the biggest danger from government perspective is a middle class, right? So you have to get rid of your middle class as fast as possible, or put them in chains, right, or bondage. So you put them in debt or UBI, which will of course be a CBDC or a stable coin, which is basically the same thing. But you will also create this incentive in order to shut borders, close borders, because you want to control the area, but you want also to get rid of those people you basically want to get rid of as many people in as many different ways as you can. And the middle class is the most dangerous group of people. And you see the same thing in the Middle East, right? Because they transferred all their productive ages from like let's say 20 to 40. They're now all in Europe, right? So the Middle East is also being cleaned up. And I think BlackRock is sort of it's moving. The financial center of the world, as Johnny Law often argues, is moving to Abu Dhabi and the Gulf states, right? That will be sort of the new London. And Europe, I think, is just going to be sacrificed and slaughtered on the altar, right? Because somebody has to bear the brunt of these changes. And America, because of the new system will be mostly robotics, Internet of Things, AI. You just need way less people, right? I mean, like Steve says, some people will become way more productive, but as each of those people become like doing the work of 100 other people or 1,000 other people, what do you do with those 100 and 1,000 other people, right?
UBI, right?
Yeah,
universal basic income or something.
Yeah, or create the incentive to leave the country, right?
Right, and that kind of becomes like what I'm saying is going to be what I feel is the catalyst for like what I'm working on right now. And it's interesting too, because like I'm looking at all these opportunities that are kind of coming out of the convergence of all the things that we've talked about today, and something we didn't even.
Can I add one more thing? Remember that speech that Bukele gave at the GOP convention? It's a really famous and powerful speech that he sort of made the argument, like what Ray Dalio also says, is like, why the hell are we even paying taxes, right? Because even if you would tax every person in the United States or in the world for 100%, you wouldn't even come close to paying off the debt, right? Because that's not really how the debt works. It's actually other countries that hold these debts, right? And the leverage in the system. So you can ask yourself, why are we even paying taxes? Like, what is the point of taxes? Are taxes not in themselves a control system? Maybe it's not even about the money, right?
I agree. I mean, that's my argument for why I don't believe in paying taxes. I'll just say that.
And then, in the past, like when you go centuries in the past, like most taxes were actually pretty low. Right, sometimes they were high, but in general they were not that high.
Wasn't it like slaves to Pharaoh would pay 20% of their crop yield?
Yeah, there were periods that it was heavy, right? Especially as these societies, disintegrated and moved into, in untenable debt, like at the end of a Roman society or at the end of the Egyptian society. So you had these debt cycles, but in the past you also had like this 10-year, was it? I forgot if it was 10 or 50 years, but somewhere in that range, you had this debt jubilee, and you had like two different levels of debt, but one of them was forgiven, and then slaves were released, and etc.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I think it's all about creating the illusion that any of this actually matters. And coming back to Japan, for instance, I kind of fit this in because it was a pretty profound experience, but I went on this retreat there and I took some time to kind of learn about what was happening in Japan, the devaluing of the yen, some of the things that we talked about earlier. But there's also some interesting things happening culturally, and it kind of ties into some of their business opportunities as well. So I was at this retreat, which took place at a temple, and we had many talks that were given by different individuals, including a discussion on Buddhism that finally made the connection to me that that's basically what I believe. Do I really practice any faith like religiously? But Not really, but do I have beliefs that are very much in line with it? Yes. And it was interesting to me because they talked about how the government is very much involved with religion there, such to that, he didn't explain his particular beliefs, but you could read between the lines and you'd understand. So you have Shintoists and Buddhists, and you'd say, well, what's the connection between Shintoists and Buddhists? And if you follow what's been happening for hundreds of years, that was established like 1,000 years ago, they're considered almost the same. It's almost like a different language for saying the same thing. What they view as the Buddha or the teacher in Buddhism is very similar to what they view as their faith structure, their preacher, their whatever you want to call it in Shintoism. There's somebody who could speak better about this, is just what I gathered just from like my short retreat, which was like 2 days. And about 100 years ago, the government came in and decided they are not the same. And so there is this kind of divide where in Wakayama and these regions to the south, where it's more traditional versus Tokyo, Osaka, the bigger cities, it's more in line with the government's point of view. And in a strange way, if you were trying to figure out somebody who's involved in religion or cares about it, if they're a statist or not, you might just simply ask them if they think Shintoism and Buddhism are related or not, because their answer would tell you a lot about whether they buy the government's perspective in the last 100 years of them being different, or whether they subscribe to the time-honored tradition that's been hundreds of years, 1,000 perhaps. And he said this, which I love about people in this culture, Japanese people. He said this, and you knew exactly what he believed without him having to tell you. And he also talked about things like how they have a addition that they're doing to their temple, but they have to be careful how they talk about it, because how you use something for profit versus something that might be a spiritual use and you get donations for, well, they're taxed and classed differently, but you might have certain properties that fit into both. And what I'm getting into from all this is, with what's happening in Japan, you might ask yourself, is there still economic opportunity there? And there is. And what they've done is quite interesting. And this organization that I've stumbled on, I'm pretty intrigued by what they're doing. But this metric is what stood out to me the most, is that they have 70,000 temples in Japan. That's their history there. They have 70,000 temples. And 1/3, or about 23,000 of them, will fall into disrepair in the next year or in a very short space of time. The reason being is that they are not producing enough monks to maintain these temples, thus that most temples do not even have one monk per temple to maintain. So you have thousands of temples with all this history that are just falling away to time because nobody can maintain them. Temples that could be a person's home, temples that could be a hotel, temples that could be used for a corporate retreat. That's like what I went on, this sort of spiritual retreat. And so they have this investment opportunity where they're basically renovating these properties and segmenting ownership like a DAO. Granted, there's some issues with that too, because Japan has very strict securities laws, such that if you were to issue a token for this, at least in the country, it could create potential problems if you weren't registering a very specific way. But they're trying to do it under a KK. I'm not going to try to pronounce it because I'll butcher it. I'm still learning the term, but it's like a type of LLC that they have there where they can structure shares and ownership so that people can basically manage it a very similar way as like a DAO. And they could issue shares to a local community who wants to be involved in the preservation of their historic their history locally. So this was kind of the topic I kind of wanted to dive into when I was discussing real world assets, because there are projects. QE Finance is a great example. Quantum economics and the quantum economics token, and they're actually very heavily interested in real world assets and deriving gains, passive income, whatever you want to call it, from investment in such assets. And it's interesting to me that in spite of, or with indifference to, all this economic instability worldwide, we continue to find opportunities for capitalism to win and bring up and save history and create new economic opportunity where it may not exist for other individuals, because you can literally buy a share of one of these temples for like $2,700. The entry point is a lot lower than what you would see with most investment opportunities, and could be a chance to not just earn passive income, have a place to stay in like a timeshare, but you could also preserve history and be supporting something bigger than yourself. And I think that's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, no, actually, we did an interview, I think 2 years ago. I think we came across him via Andy Lian, but it was sort of, I think it was a Korean or a Japanese group who sort of did exactly this. I forgot the name of them, but it was also a DAO who was sort of investing in religious sites. But yeah, I think it sort of really ties into what we were just talking about, because as this economy, as far as it is engineered or natural, it doesn't really matter, but at some point it will, you get these booms and busts. And that's also why, and these booms and busts creates opportunities, right? I mean, in Weimar Germany, you got this huge wealth transfer from one group of people, the middle class and the elderly, to sort of the younger people who were invested in stocks and gold, right? So, and especially stocks. And you're seeing that right now, like there's this huge wealth transfer, and that will be, people like us who are in crypto and Bitcoin, but also people in gold and silver, and and in these kind of opportunities. And as this sort of system transforms, a lot of people will go bust, and other people will boom. And I think also with America and the property taxes and all the stuff that we already talked about, and the same thing is also with Japan is also closing off, right? Japan has like a 400-year or 500-year history of being closed off from the outside world, and they have this very sort of homogeneous society and rules around it. And I think this year or next year they're gonna insert tourism tax, so to keep even more people out of Japan. And at some point you get a yard sale, right? I mean, at some point the world will become a yard sale where you can actually buy these properties and these lands. And for the people who are, like Trump, who are invested in Bitcoin and crypto, it will be a yard sale, as people have to get rid of their property and sell their land to, I mean, that's what Catherine Olsen Fitz is also warning about. Like, they're engineering this boom bust cycle, and they're setting themselves up to have the means, and so the means to buy the means of production, right? It's basically like, what's happening in socialism, where one group of people will have the means of production because they have the means to buy those productions and get rid of the people on the lands who used to own them. And well, and apart from the temples, which is, I think, a very sad story in itself. But yeah, it's positive that people like us could sort of help maintain these temples. But something very similar happened in Europe, where because of de-religion, or where people become more or less religious and more statist, right? Because statism is sort of the new religion, and then they took out the church, the Catholic Church, by bringing out all the mishaps, which was awful, and it's good that they did it, but it sort of destroyed the Catholic Church. And then they infiltrated it, I think, with the previous Pope, and now with the new Pope, it's completely aligned with American interests. So, and the Catholic Church was, of course, a very big independent player with a lot of power, and the Vatican was untouchable. And they did the same thing in Islam, and I think they did the same thing in many other religions, which I won't name. But yeah, we also had to sell our churches and turn them into private enterprises so that they could be maintained. And on the one hand, I think it's a good thing because these are wonderful buildings with a lot of history attached to them. But on the other hand, it's also very sad, right? Because they were places of worship and religion, and that is being hollowed out and privatized and commercialized, and which I think is also the point of the exercise to get rid of religion is, to get rid of the houses of worship and turn them into something else entirely. And but it kind of depends on who buys it, right? I mean, if you're buying it with the intention to keep it a place of worship, then it's fine, right? So, but Japan has a very rich history. I think Buddhism was introduced from Korea into the Nara society when Nara was still the capital of Japan. And that had like a very Chinese layout, the ancient capital of Nara. And then it moved to Kyoto, but basically Buddhism was a state religion almost from the get-go, right? And it was merged with Shintoism because Shintoism is like they believe in natural spirits, and the Buddhists those who reached nirvana were equated with the kami spirits. So immediately, sort of those traditions were merged at the hip. And then, but it's very interesting with the Meiji Restoration that they sort of pulled them apart again. And of course, Shintoism played a very huge role in kamikaze pilots and believing in the purity and uniqueness of Japan in the Second World War, of leading up to the Second World War. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's the idea too when they talk about. Not that I'm trying to, I guess, reduce it to just being like it's a reason to be a suicide bomber, a kamikaze bomber. But,
it's a beautiful religion. Actually, kamikaze, it means holy storm, and it was actually the samurai who defeated because the Mongols were, spreading all over Central Asia, all the way to Europe, but they even sort of had 2 invasions of Japan, right? Where they had like this huge Mongol fleet, and it was the samurai who were waiting there on the beach, but it was the storm who defeated the Mongol invasion, and a lot of people died, but it was a holy storm, a natural spirit who destroyed the fleet of the Mongols, which is why Japan was not conquered by the Mongols as well. And then, basically the Mongols had the biggest empire in history apart from the British or the Americans, depends on how you look at it.
That's fascinating. Was it like a natural occurrence, but they consider it a spiritual? That's incredible. That's where, I mean, how do you differentiate the two? I mean, we can kind of look at science and we can look at religion and we can look at them as unrelated. You can look at quantum physics and trying to bridge the two, but there is something interesting about the connection between our beliefs and our natural phenomena that surrounds us. And it seems like people who are believers can channel some pretty incredible things into their lives. And that's kind of like what's interesting about what would make a good warrior, what would make a good samurai, etc. If you believe, for example, with Buddhism, this idea that you're impacting your karma. I used to think your karma was something that happened to your soul. I think that's like a Western kind of belief, but your karma is your soul based on this discussion they had. And basically your karma is the sum total of what you've done. So you are what you do, essentially, which is very much in line with what I believe as well. But the idea, I would presume, and again, you could apply this to any kind of situation, but if you die honorably, doing something meaningful to protect your family, to protect your country, to protect like what matters to you, you're essentially impacting your karma in such a way that when you come back into another life, whether that is as another human, as a bird, as a god, whatever it might be, that it's meaningful, that it is not just the end of your existence, but it is the actual transformation of your existence by doing a good deed. And, to meet a group of clear capitalists who I got along with so well, but also to see this kind of like spiritual connection and see that these people, they're not starting with just these 5 temples, right? Like they have a structure such that they want to create other baskets of properties that they can grow this and grow this and grow this, because the inventory is massive. I just told you like 23,000 that'll just fall into disrepair.
Yeah.
Looking at like 70,000 without, and this also ties into what we were talking about earlier with like the low birth rate, but also you're talking about people becoming more secular and not continuing the religious practices. I mean, when you can't even get one monk per temple when your population is understandably growing, right? But you have 70,000 temples and you can't maintain them because your religion, or at least your population to maintain them, isn't growing accordingly. That's fascinating to me. But they seem to be a group of people that is doing this the right way. They want to obviously find a way to economically support these opportunities while preserving the spiritual importance of what they represent. And I think finding that balance is tremendously important and tremendously rare. And they seem to be doing that. And they're stepping up in a place where their governments are not, right? Because their governments won't even stand by the belief that Shintoists and Buddhists should be aligned. They want them to be separated in terms of how they practice New Year ceremonies and everything. It's all completely different. If you look at how a cultural place like Wakayama celebrates versus Osaka or Tokyo, night and day different. I mean, there's this divide that's literally perpetuated by the government, but they're also trying to solve this problem while being compliant with that same government. And they don't seem to be bitter about it, but they do seem to have a good sense of humor about it. And I'm excited at looking at opportunities, not just to get involved or to get other people involved in this as well, but to really fulfill the idea of doing this as a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization that could come in, buy up these properties, and maybe issue a token that's outside of the country to represent it. But even if they can't do it for some reason, because of the properties being located, being local to Japan, whether or not the owners are foreign, I still think there's tremendous opportunity here, because it's just so crazy to think about that we have so many people who are homeless and struggling, and we have like 23,000 temples that'll just fall apart from someone not maintaining it. I'm pretty sure there are 23,000 people globally who, if they were given a free place to live just so that they could maintain it, they would do it. But this is like the disparity of being able to provide value that we struggle with. So it becomes an opportunity, and in situations like this, the right people take over it. And I'm really excited to see what kind of boom we'll have in property in Japan from what they're taking on here.
Yeah, and I think you can even sort of cast it in Bitcoin terms. I think we also have to wrap up, because me and Hedy, we both have to go. And it was an amazing episode, and we covered a lot of ground. But I think you can even cast it in Bitcoin terms, because there's a link between Stoicism and Buddhism, right? I think it was Christopher Beckwith who stated, he made the argument from a historical perspective, but also from a philosophical perspective, that there's a lot of commonalities and overlap between the two, and that it was during Alexander the Great when he went into Central Asia, and you got some really amazing places back then in the Silk Road, where I think it was Pyrrho of Elis. He's like a famous skeptic from Pyrrhonian skepticism, who took a lot of these Buddhist religious elements and took them to Greeks. And Pyrrho sort of educated, what's his name? Zeno, who basically founded Stoicism. So basically what I'm trying to say here in a very roundabout way is, if Stoicism is the religion of Bitcoin, which if it has a religion, I think, Stoicism comes closest, then Buddhism is its, Asian cousin. So from that perspective, we would be sort of saving our own heritage and sort of bringing new life into these places. And for the Book of Five Rings, the Bushido, where the samurai was founded on, it's sort of a mixture of Buddhism, Shintoism, and Confucianism. And basically, when you read it, it's very much like the Bitcoin ethos. In a way, it's very popular among Bitcoiners. So to all the Bitcoiners out there, save Japan, invest in these places, and help these religious sites and give them a new meaning, and tie them to Bitcoin.
Yeah. hit me up. I will make the connections for you. But yeah, I'm talking to Quantum Economics about possible opportunities there to connect the community with it. But like I said, the inventory is so massive, and anybody who's interested, like, there's the inventory. We're looking for investors in this, and it could be really good passive income. And thank you guys for coming on and having these discussions today. It was a really wonderful discussion. The only thing we didn't really get to as much as I wanted to is quantum AI, quantum computing and AI. But I think we could have a whole topic just on that. And I think the whole cultural collapse thing we covered in some other terms. So basically we covered everything. And I think this other topic, we could do a whole episode just on that. So maybe we'll consider that for the future.
Yeah, it was a tall order, but we managed to cover like 90% of it. So I think we did.
We got like 3 hours, right?
Yeah.
We could watch Titanic in this amount of time.
For the the digibiters who are watching, like, I think Johnny Law couldn't make it for probably personal reasons or whatever, but he will probably be on a future. So
good stuff.
Yeah, let's wrap it up.
All right. Thanks, guys, again for another exciting episode of DeFi Expectations, and we'll be on next week.
Take care.
Take care.